A locked iron door. The key turns, and the air shifts, cool, heavy, older than the city above. Beyond this threshold lies a vault that has swallowed secrets for centuries. Boxes stretch for miles, their labels whispering of trials that silenced voices, letters from kings who lost their crowns, and a war the church still cannot stop debating. These halls do not shout, they wait. Every sealed box could hold a revelation, every faded page a truth the world was never meant to see. For generations, the Vatican has guarded these forbidden archives with silence. But tonight, we step closer. What has been hidden behind locked doors will finally begin to speak. Dust floats in a thin beam of light. A cart squeaks. A box lands on a wooden table with a soft thud. Inside are letters that once bent thrones and shaped faith. You feel it at once, the quiet pull of history. This is no myth. Beneath Vatican City rests a maze of shelves that stretch for kilometers. Scholars come with hard questions and calm hands. Some seek the minutes of Galileo's trial. Others read wartime cables that still stir debate. The name changed in 2019 from secret to apostolic to make one point clear. Secretum meant private, not mysterious. But the mystery never really left. It only learned to whisper. Doors do not open for everyone. You need credentials, purpose, and patience. Inside, the rules are simple. Request, wait, read, record. No treasure hunts, no midnight chases. Yet the mind races all the same. What else is here? A queen's plea before death? A king's broken marriage? The traces of an order crushed and scattered? Pieces of these stories do live on these shelves, in ink that still bites the page. And then there are the legends, the time window chronovisor, secret devices, hidden bones. The archives neither confirm nor feed such tales, but they travel with us like shadows, daring us to look twice. We will look, and we will name what is known, what is likely, and what is only a story. Our path is simple. Enter, observe, and listen. We will move from famous cases to quiet files that rarely see daylight. We will meet the people who guard the stacks and the scholars who turn pages like surgeons. We will ask the hardest question of all. How do closed doors shape what the world believes? Take a breath. The cart is rolling again. Another box arrives. The iron door does not shout. It waits. No ornate carvings, no holy warning carved into marble. Just a heavy door, quiet and sure of its purpose, standing at the end of a narrow corridor under the Apostolic Palace. A simple lock, a guard who knows your name before you speak it, and silence that makes the air itself feel dense. If you ever find yourself standing there, you do not feel like a conqueror at the gates of mystery. You feel very small, as though the stones above your head have been listening for centuries, measuring every step, weighing whether you belong. The Vatican's forbidden archives are not a fantasy built by novels or films. They are real, and their new name, Apostolic Archive, does not erase what they are. For more than 400 years, their doors have stayed closed to all but a chosen few. Scholars, priests, and researchers walk past Swiss guards and into this stillness not with a sense of triumph, but with reverence. Because here, behind the simple lock, lies 85 kilometers of shelves that carry the weight of both power and confession. Every note, every sealed letter, every decree is a memory made permanent. When you first cross the threshold, the silence is the first thing you notice. It is not ordinary silence. It feels alive. Like the archives themselves, are listening to your footsteps. A faint smell of old leather lingers, parchment aged into hues of brown and yellow, ink that still bites the fibres of paper as if resisting time. Light filters softly, never harsh, always angled to protect. You are not in a movie chase through dusty catacombs. You are in a carefully guarded chamber where the very air feels curated to preserve. And yet, despite the quiet order, your heart does race. Because every shelf you pass, whispers questions. What is in that box? Whose signature bends the page within? Why was this file sealed when kingdoms fell and wars ended? The threshold is not just a physical crossing, it is a crossing of the imagination. Outside, you had only rumours, fragments, stories about lost gospels and secret machines, about kings begging for annulments and heretics facing inquisitors. Inside, you are confronted with reality, a library of human struggle and belief, methodically filed, patiently waiting. The archives are not called secret because of mystery, but because of privacy. The Latin word secretum meant personal, set apart, not meant for everyone, and yet the word did its own work. For centuries, secret archives carried an air of forbidden allure. To most of the world, the name suggested locked doors, hiding unholy truths. When Pope Francis ordered the name changed in 2019 to the Apostolic Archives, the reasoning was clear. Secrecy was never the intent. Privacy, order, confidentiality, that was the point. But it is hard to undo centuries of storytelling. People still whisper, still imagine that somewhere in these stacks lies a truth too dangerous to release. Walking deeper past the threshold, you learn that access is never casual. You cannot simply arrive and demand to see what you want. You apply and you wait. You must hold credentials, be a scholar, a historian with a reason. Once approved, you are assigned a reading room. You request a box. You wait again. Then it arrives on a cart, a plain wooden cart, pushed quietly across the floor. There are no glowing relics, no dramatic unsealing, just a box, a slip of paper, and your hands. What you do from there determines whether the past reveals anything at all. It is said that this place is less like a library and more like a memory bank of the world's most enduring institution. That is why the threshold matters so much. When you step past it, you are not just walking into a room of old books. You are walking into the long memory of a church that has shaped nations, crowned kings, silenced voices, and preserved prayers. The archives hold correspondence with emperors, records of trials that shifted the fate of science, treaties that redrew borders, and pleas written in ink by people who feared their last hour was near. The threshold is a boundary, not just between you and a locked door, but between now and centuries that still breathe. The door closes behind you with a sound that echoes longer than it should. You look back once, instinctively, and then forward again. Ahead lies order, rows of wooden cabinets, steel shelves, boxes, stacked neatly and marked with numbers that mean nothing to a newcomer. There are no helpful signs, no coloured arrows. The threshold has already taught you a lesson. Curiosity alone is not enough. Here, you must know what you seek, or you will drown in silence. And yet, drowning might not be the worst fate. For in the quiet, you realise something else. These shelves are not just Vatican history. They are world history, seen through the lens of power and faith. The threshold does not just close behind you. It closes the noise of the world outside. Inside, you stand at the edge of a vault that has guarded its memories while empires rose and fell. Every archive has a threshold, every locked box, every sealed letter. What lies beyond is rarely as dramatic as the stories built around it. And yet, when you pass the Vatican's threshold, you know this. Even if what you find is simple ink on paper, that ink once changed lives, altered kingdoms, or saved a soul. And so you step carefully, because each file you open could shift the way you understand not just the past, but the present. And that is why the threshold matters. It is not a locked door keeping you out. It is a moment that forces you to decide what you believe about the mysteries of power, of silence, of truth waiting in a box. Once you cross it, you cannot look at the Vatican or at history in quite the same way again. The sound is faint at first. The scratch of quill on parchment, a priest bent low over a desk, the ink dark as night itself, seeping into a page that will outlive empires. A letter leaves his hand, folded carefully, sealed with red wax, carried by couriers through dust and storm. That letter does not simply travel, it governs. Across borders, overseas, into the hands of kings and queens, emperors and generals. And inside the Vatican's forbidden archives, these letters still wait, silent but alive with the force they once carried. Every empire has armies, every kingdom has walls, but the Church had words. It had decrees and papal bulls, documents that could crown or unseat a ruler with a single sentence. The archives breathe with this history. You imagine standing before a box labelled simply with a date 1493. Inside rests parchment bearing the bull, Inter Caetera, written by Pope Alexander VI. Ink on that page divided the world itself, one half to Spain, one half to Portugal. Oceans and continents, with lines drawn in a study in Rome, lines that millions would live and die by, borders we still know today were first imagined in this ink. That is the weight of words preserved here. Not every letter speaks of conquest. Some whisper of longing, of sorrow, of doubt. A queen, imprisoned in Scotland, sends a plea for mercy to the Pope. Mary Stuart's words still lie in these stacks, her desperation pressed between folds that once carried the scent of candle smoke and fear. A few lines of handwriting reveal more than 1,000 pages of history books ever could. A woman's hope, a crown's fragility, the cold logic of politics. To touch these pages is to step into a world where words did more than describe, they created. A papal letter could declare a marriage invalid, unravelling alliances between kingdoms. A decree could silence a scientist, not with violence, but with ink. A single order, carried by parchment, could summon armies or send ships into seas no European had yet seen. And all of it remains, locked in this quiet labyrinth beneath Vatican City. Imagine a researcher turning the fragile leaf of a 16th century manuscript. The letters form words that feel oddly familiar, Latin phrases that once rolled off the tongues of diplomats and priests. The handwriting is sharp, angular, marked by the urgency of the moment. There is no flourish, no art just command. But hidden in the margins are notes from scribes, reminders to recheck, to clarify, to copy. Behind the authority of the Pope, there were always human hands, hurried, careful, sometimes unsure, and what those hands left behind still reverberates. Think of the Council of Trent, where doctrines that would define Catholicism for centuries were shaped and signed. The decrees written there were more than theological musings. They became architecture, art, education, music. They became the universe through which millions understood their place, their prayers, their fate. Ink shaped not just belief, but the rhythm of daily life, the sound of bells in a village, the way a family whispered before meals. The archives are filled with these silent architects. The letters are bones of a structure invisible to most, but everywhere in effect. Open one drawer, and you find the words that excommunicated a monarch. Open another, and you see the ink that welcomed explorers into new lands under banners of faith. Walk a little further, and you may stumble upon a papal response to a peasant's petition. Humble words met with careful acknowledgement. Power and tenderness live side by side here, written in the same ink, preserved by the same dust. It is tempting to think of these documents as relics, artifacts of a world long gone, but look closer. Much of our modern world, its borders, its disputes, its treaties, was born in these letters. The archives are not simply storage, they are mirrors, showing how words created realities, realities that still hold. To read them is to feel the pulse of authority that once moved like lightning through parchment and seal. And so, when we speak of ink that made a universe, we are not speaking in metaphor. We are speaking of the literal strokes of quills that carved continents, that weighed the fates of queens, that silenced voices or blessed voyages. The archives are not dead, they hum with the energy of creation. and as each letter is read again, that creation continues. The room is quiet, but the paper speaks. A date written at the top, 1633. The ink still sharp, the handwriting precise. These are the minutes of Galileo's trial, the documents that turned a man who watched the stars into a figure chained by his own church. To stand before these pages is to feel the collision of belief and discovery, of authority and wonder. Galileo Galilei did not come to Rome seeking trouble. He came with calculations, with telescopes that showed moons circling Jupiter, with arguments that the earth itself moved. What he found instead was a tribunal, a set of men determined to hold the universe still. The archives preserve every step, the accusations, the defences, the warnings given years earlier to silence him. It is all here, line after line, still sharp after 4 centuries. The documents are not dramatic in appearance. No glowing ink, no grand seal of mystery. Just words, written carefully, as though order itself depended on neatness. But as you read them, you hear voices behind the words. The cautious voice of Galileo, insisting he had only considered possibilities, that he never meant to defy the scriptures. The stern voice of the inquisitors, warning that to claim the earth moved was to defy God's order. These are not just lines of text. They are a dialogue frozen in ink, the tension of a moment when truth and power faced one another across a wooden table. The sentence, when it comes, is written in the same calm hand. Galileo is found guilty of vehement suspicion of heresy. He is forced to recant, and there, preserved forever, are the conditions of his punishment. No dungeon, no fire, but house arrest. The man who measured the heavens would spend the rest of his life confined, his telescope set aside, his words monitored. The archives hold the evidence of that silencing, not in legend, but in the plain clarity of ink. To read these pages is to feel the coldness of bureaucracy. Truth debated not under stars, but under candles, in rooms where power outweighed observation. Galileo's trial reminds us that knowledge does not move freely. It is weighed, judged, and sometimes restrained by those who fear its implications. The archives show us the moment when science met resistance, and the universe itself seemed to pause. But there is another silence in Galileo's room, the silence of what could not be erased. Though he recanted, his ideas did not vanish. They travelled, copied, whispered, carried beyond the walls of his confinement. The archives contain the trial, but the sky still contained its moons, and eventually the world turned again. In this way, Galileo's room is not just a record of suppression. It is a testament to resilience. A man forced to kneel, yet whose observations continued to stand. When you hold these papers, you feel the paradox. The church sought to contain him, but by preserving the record of his trial, it preserved his voice. The archives bear witness not only to authority, but to the endurance of truth. And in the quiet of Galileo's room, you realize that history itself is not about victory or defeat. It is about the tension between them, ink pressed into parchment, waiting for future eyes to see. Boxes marked with a date, 1312. Inside them, parchments that still breathe the dust of a vanished order. The Knights Templar, warrior monks whose rise and fall still stir imaginations, find their echoes here in the Vatican's forbidden archives. The myths are endless hidden treasures, secret rites, sudden executions. But the archives do not deal in myth. They deal in ink, in seals, in careful testimony written by scribes who lived through the storm. The suppression of the Templars was not a single blow. It was a slow tightening, accusations whispered, trials held in secret chambers. The documents preserved here tell that story, but not in the fiery language of legend. Instead, they are methodical, legal, almost cold. Charges listed: heresy, idolatry, corruption, witnesses named. Confessions recorded some freely given, others clearly forced. The handwriting does not tremble with drama, it simply records. And yet those records condemned thousands of men who once fought in crusades under the sign of the cross. The Chinon parchment, rediscovered in the archives in the early 2000s, changed what we thought we knew. It revealed that Pope Clement V had, in fact, absolved the Templar leadership of heresy, even while political forces pressed for their destruction. The parchment itself is unremarkable to the eye, faded ink, a papal seal, but its contents echo across centuries. The Templars were not crushed solely by religious judgment. They were victims of politics, of a king who feared their power and sought their wealth. The archives hold the evidence that truth and justice do not always align. To walk among these boxes is to feel the weight of endings. The Templars were not saints, nor were they the demonic figures their enemies claimed. They were men bound by oaths, caught between loyalty to God and loyalty to power. Their fall was written not on battlefields, but in the quiet ink of trials and decrees. And those words outlived them. The echoes of the Templars linger not because of what they did, but because of how they ended. Sudden, brutal, and shrouded in secrecy. And the archives, by preserving the plain truth of their trials, give us a mirror. They remind us that myth grows in the gaps left by silence. And when power chooses silence, legend fills the void. Here in the Vatican's labyrinth, the Templars' voices do not roar, they whisper. And if you listen closely enough, you may hear in those whispers not only the story of a fallen order, but the deeper truth that all power, whether cloaked in armour or parchment, is fragile when fear decides its fate. The paper is thin, almost translucent, but the words pressed onto it are heavy. Somewhere in the stacks of the Vatican's archives lies the final plea of Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots. The letter is dated February 1587, written in her final hours before execution. Imagine her sitting at a desk, candlelight flickering, her hand steady, even as she knew she would not see another dawn. She addressed it to Pope Sixtus V, appealing not for her life, for that had already been signed away, but for her soul and for the faith she carried to her last breath. The archives keep this letter as they keep thousands of others, but this one carries a stillness that feels different. The ink is not ornate. There are no flourishes of triumph. Instead, there is clarity, an almost frightening calm. Mary writes of betrayal, of her steadfast Catholic faith in a land that condemned her for it. She asks for prayers, for the strength to face what comes. You read the words and realize she already knew how history would remember her, not as a queen reigning in power, but as a martyr for her faith. The weight of that moment is still present in the letter. Each fold, each crease marks the urgency of time. By the time the parchment reached Rome, Mary was already gone, her head severed, her body draped in black cloth. And yet, her words lived on, carried across Europe, preserved by those who believed they spoke not only for her but for a faith under siege. The archives hold that silence, the gap between a plea written in candlelight and a sword raised at dawn. But to read the Queen's last letter is to realize something more. History often tells us about kings with armies, about treaties sealed in marble halls. Yet here is a queen at her weakest moment, still commanding history with ink. She had no sword, no power left, only words. And those words crossed borders that her body never could. They reached Rome. They reached posterity. They reached us. Imagine a scholar, centuries later, unfolding the document for the first time. The reading room is silent. Gloves cover the hands that hold the fragile paper. And, as the lines are read, the air thickens. Because this is not just a piece of history, it is a voice from the edge of death, still speaking. The archivist who first catalogued the document must have felt it too. The Vatican did not acquire it for display. They acquired it because history without voices becomes empty. Mary's voice is preserved because her faith mattered to the institution but also because her words matter to humanity. Her execution was not the end of her influence. In many ways, it was only the beginning. Her son James would inherit both the Scottish and English crowns, uniting kingdoms she could not. And her letter, preserved in the Vatican, became a relic of resilience, of the endurance of belief, even against the axe. When you hold that story in your mind, you see how the archives preserve not only the actions of power, but the moments of surrender that still reverberate. Mary's last letter is not grand in style. It does not boast, it does not curse. It simply names her truth, her faith, her trust in God as the blade approached. And that is why it matters, because sometimes the most enduring power comes not from those who stand triumphant, but from those who fall with conviction. The archives remind us of that. They remind us that history is not only written by the victors, it is written by the condemned, the silenced, the ones who left their final breath in ink. The pages rustle like whispers in a hall where crowns are heavy but fragile. The story of Henry VIII and his petition to the Pope lies preserved here, a story told in documents that once determined the fate of nations. The King of England wanted an annulment. He wanted to be free from Catherine of Aragon. But the Church did not move quickly enough for him, and impatience became a storm that reshaped the religious map of Europe. Inside the Vatican's archives, the records of this petition still rest. They are not dramatic in appearance. They are measured, legal, and filled with the cautious language of diplomacy. Letters from Henry's envoys, arguments framed in theology, pleas wrapped in formality. You might expect fury, but what you find is calculation. A king trying to bend the most powerful institution in Christendom to his will, using parchment and persuasion. The ink speaks of strategy, not tantrum. But beneath the calm words lies urgency. Henry wanted an heir. He wanted freedom. He wanted his will to be stronger than tradition. His ambassadors pressed the case before Pope Clement VII, citing scripture, legal precedents, anything that could justify undoing his marriage. The Vatican's response, preserved in equal detail, was cautious. They stalled. They weighed politics. They hesitated, and hesitation was fatal. For while Rome deliberated, Henry acted. The annulment was never granted. Instead, Henry declared himself the head of the Church of England. The documents in the Vatican preserve the quiet before the moment when it could still have gone differently. If the Pope had decided swiftly, if the papers had returned to England with approval, perhaps history would have bent another way. But the silence, the slowness, the locked drawers of deliberation, these are what gave birth to a schism. Reading the petitions today, you feel the tension of what was lost. A continent once united, under one faith, now splintered. Wars of religion followed, blood spilled in villages and cities. And it began with a request written in formal Latin, preserved today in a quiet box under Rome. The king who would not wait left Europe forever changed. And that is the strange power of archives. They show us not only what was decided, but what was delayed. History is not always about grand actions. Sometimes it is about letters unanswered, requests left pending. The Vatican's hesitation was as decisive as any decree. And the paper that recorded it, silent now, still carries the weight of choices not made in time. To sit with these documents is to sit with a crossroads. You see the king's plea, the church's reluctance, and you know the outcome. But in the moment, none of them could see it clearly. That is the gift and the curse of archives. They show us the exact words, but they cannot soften the edges of hindsight. We know what they did not, that patience, or the lack of it, can fracture worlds. The box arrives on a cart, ordinary in appearance, yet inside it lies a storm. Documents from the pontificate of Pius XII, opened to scholars in 2020, fill the Vatican's archives with echoes of the Second World War. For decades, historians argued, in the absence of full evidence, did the Pope speak loudly enough against the Holocaust? Did the Church act with courage, or did silence protect it? Now, the files sit open, and the answers are not simple. The papers reveal correspondence between the Vatican and bishops across Europe. Some letters plead for help, describing Jews rounded up, families torn apart. Others report rumours, uncertain but chilling. The Vatican's replies, carefully worded, sometimes cautious, sometimes urgent, show a church struggling to balance diplomacy with moral responsibility. The words are often frustrating. Where we want bold condemnation, we find measured phrases. Where we expect clarity, we find hesitation. And yet, scattered among them are moments of quiet courage, orders to hide refugees in monasteries, notes to issue false baptismal certificates, attempts to intervene discreetly. The archives do not give us a single story. They give us fragments, contradictions, the messiness of reality. A pope who feared that open protest would provoke harsher reprisals, clergy who acted bravely in silence, others who looked away. Each letter is a voice in the storm, a reminder that history is not written in absolutes, but in the tension between fear and action. To sit with these wartime files is to feel the weight of moral ambiguity. The paper does not shout, it does not absolve or condemn. It simply presents, line by line, what was said, what was asked, what was answered. And in that quiet, the reader must wrestle with the hardest truth of all. Sometimes silence saves, sometimes it destroys. The archives make no judgment. They preserve, they leave judgment to us. And that is the unsettling power of the wartime files. They do not close debates, they open them wider. They force us to see that history's greatest questions are not resolved by a single decree, but by countless letters, countless choices, preserved in boxes that waited decades for us to look inside. The letters are stacked in quiet rows, each line of ink calm, measured, precise. But the story they hold is anything but calm. These are the wartime years of Pope Pius XII, years when Europe burned and millions vanished into camps whose names still echo like wounds. For decades, people have argued about these papers, asking whether the Church spoke loudly enough, whether silence was complicity, whether measured words were too little while fire consumed the world. And here, in the Vatican's archives, those questions are not answered with clarity. They are answered with tension. When you first open one of these wartime files, you might expect drama urgent warnings, commands written in haste, but instead you find restraint. A letter from a bishop in Poland describes the arrest of Jews, whole villages emptied. The words are heavy with desperation. The Vatican's reply, polite, careful, acknowledges receipt. It assures prayers. It promises to study. You feel frustration pressing against the calmness of the reply. It is as though the ink itself holds back, unwilling to spill too much. This restraint was deliberate. Pius XII believed that direct condemnation of Nazi crimes would provoke worse retaliation. He thought quiet diplomacy, discreet action, and silence in public might protect more lives than fiery declarations. And so the archive is filled with such measured lines. Letters urging restraint, replies couched in formal tones, declarations that stop short of naming names. It is easy, reading now, to demand more, to ask why the Pope did not shout when the world burned, to ask why silence was chosen over fire. But then you find another letter, written not for the public but for trusted envoys. It speaks of sheltering refugees in monasteries. It encourages priests to issue false baptism certificates to protect Jewish children. Suddenly, the story is less simple. Silence in public, action in shadow. Caution on paper, courage in hidden corridors. The archive holds both at once, forcing you to sit in the discomfort of contradiction. The question of silence versus fire is not answered by one letter. It is spread across thousands. Some show hesitation that feels unbearable in hindsight. Others show quiet defiance. The archives do not give a verdict, they force you to live with ambiguity. And that, perhaps, is the hardest lesson of all. History is not tidy, it is not clear. It is filled with choices made in fear, in caution, in hope that restraint might save more than protest could. In these files, you also find voices from outside, begging for the Pope to speak louder. Jewish leaders, Allied diplomats, even some Catholics, pleaded for public condemnation. They believed words from Rome could carry power enough to shake the world. Pius believed otherwise. And so silence endured, silence that was not absence but strategy, silence that left many feeling abandoned, silence that historians now debate with fire in their own voices. To sit with these documents is to feel the unease of watching moral responsibility and political caution collide. There is no way to make it clean. The ink does not allow absolution, nor does it deliver final condemnation. It simply remains, waiting for the reader to carry the weight, silence and fire. Both lived here, both shaped decisions, both left scars that still ache when the files are opened. The archive is old, but it has not always been safe. There was a time when even the Vatican's locked doors could not protect its memory. That time came with Napoleon. In 1810, the emperor ordered the entire archive seized. Boxes, cabinets, chests filled with centuries of papal correspondence, decrees, and secrets were packed up and sent north. Over 3,000 crates carried Rome's memory across the Alps to Paris, where Napoleon intended to place the Church's history under his gaze. Imagine the chaos. Monks and archivists watching as boxes were hauled out, seals broken, order dismantled. For centuries, the archive had been intact, a labyrinth where memory was carefully filed. Suddenly, it was scattered. Scholars in Paris opened crates with curiosity, flipping through documents that had never left Rome. Some were catalogued, some were lost, some were stolen. The archive became vulnerable in a way it had never been before. When Napoleon fell, the Vatican asked for its archive back. And the crates did return, but not all. Of the thousands sent, hundreds never came home. Whole sections of memory were missing, scattered across Europe, sold to collectors, lost to fire or neglect. The Vatican recovered much, but it could never recover everything. Even now, historians know there are gaps in the record, shadows where boxes once stood. To walk through the archive today is to walk through those gaps. You see rows of shelves neatly ordered, and yet you know some stories are gone forever. Napoleon's theft left scars, and yet, paradoxically, it also brought attention. Before the seizure, the Vatican's archive was closed to nearly everyone. Its reputation as a secret vault was already growing, but once the documents were seen in Paris, curiosity multiplied. Scholars realized what treasures were hidden behind Rome's doors. When the archive returned, demand for access grew. Napoleon had stolen more than paper, he had stolen secrecy. And when he returned the paper, secrecy could never be sealed in quite the same way again. The Vatican calls the crates taken by Napoleon the lost boxes. The phrase lingers like a ghost. They are reminders that even memory can be plundered, that history itself can be carried away in wagons. Some of those lost papers still resurface today, auctioned quietly, discovered in forgotten libraries. Each rediscovery is a small victory, a fragment of Rome's memory coming home. Napoleon's box, then, is more than a story of theft. It is a reminder of fragility. The archive feels eternal, but it is not immune to conquest. Even the strongest vaults can be opened when power demands it. And yet, the archive survived. Broken, scattered, scarred, but still alive. When you walk the halls today, you can still feel the echo of that violation. It reminds you that memory is precious because it can be lost. You open a box, and inside lies a parchment older than most nations. The handwriting is neat, the ink darkened with time. But how do you know it is real? How do you know it is not a forgery slipped in centuries ago? The Vatican's archives are not only about memory. They are about proof. Every page must prove itself, or its voice cannot be trusted. Archivists, paleographers, and historians spend lifetimes studying these proofs. They know the rhythm of a scribe's hand, the way certain letters curve in the 12th century, but not in the 15th. They know the smell of ink made from oak galls, the weight of parchment prepared from calfskin. They can tell when a seal has been pressed fresh, or when it was reattached later. Each page speaks in details so small most eyes would miss them. But to the trained reader, those details are louder than words. Consider a forged papal bull. In the Middle Ages, ambitious abbeys sometimes fabricated documents, granting them privileges they never received. These forgeries were clever, filled with Latin phrasing meant to mimic authenticity. But centuries later, archivists spotted mistakes, a style of lettering not used in that era, a formula borrowed from another century, a wax seal pressed with a mould that did not exist yet. The page betrayed itself. Inside the Vatican's archive, authenticity is not assumed, it is tested. Watermarks, hidden in the fibres of paper, reveal the year and place it was made. Marginal notes in different hands show how many times a document was copied, corrected, or expanded. Even the chemistry of ink can be studied, revealing whether it came from medieval mixtures or modern fraud. Each test adds another layer of certainty, building trust that the memory preserved here is not only old, but true. But proof is not only about catching lies, it is about honouring the past. When you hold a page and know it is authentic, you are holding a moment of history exactly as it was. The papal bull that divided continents, the Queen's last letter, the Templar confessions, they all carry weight because they can be trusted. Without proof, they are only stories. With proof, they are voices from the past that still stand. Sometimes, proof comes not from science, but from context. A letter once dismissed as unimportant suddenly gains weight when paired with another found decades later. Two voices, once separate, now confirm each other. The archive is full of such hidden connections, proof waiting in silence until someone sees it. That is why archivists say the pages speak only when you know how to listen. In this way, the Vatican's archive is not just a collection. It is a court where every page is tested, where every voice must prove itself before being admitted into history. And when it passes, when the ink and fibres and seals align, you feel a quiet awe. Because in your hands, you are not holding a story invented, but a truth endured. Proof is what makes the archive sacred. Proof is what keeps memory alive. The ritual begins not with a grand key or a creaking door, but with something deceptively ordinary, a slip of paper. A rectangle of cardstock, blank at first, soon filled with your hand as you write the name of the file you wish to see. This request slip is the true key to the Vatican's archives. Without it, you wander blind, pressed against locked shelves. With it, the past rolls toward you on a cart. The process is deceptively simple. You enter the reading room, bright with natural light filtered through curtains that soften the Roman Sunday. Around you, silence hums like a cathedral service. Researchers sit at long wooden tables, their faces lowered, pens scratching, laptops glowing faintly. The smell of paper, centuries old, clings faintly in the air. At the front desk, you find the slips. You take one in your hand. And in that small action ink on paper, a name written down, you set in motion a chain that could connect you to kings, queens, heretics, saints. The slip must be precise. You cannot simply write Templar Files or Mary Stuart's last letter. You must know the box number, the catalogue reference, the series code. Without that, the request returns unanswered. The archive is not a place for treasure hunts. it is a place of order, and order is guarded with the same devotion as the documents themselves. A mistake on your slip means wasted time. Accuracy means revelation. Once handed over, the slip disappears into the quiet bureaucracy of the archive. Somewhere behind locked doors, staff search through rows of shelves stretching for kilometers. They locate the box you named, check it against your slip, place it carefully on a wooden cart, and wheel it toward you. Hours may pass. The slip is not instant gratification, it is patience embodied. And when the box finally arrives, the weight of it feels like the answer to a prayer. Opening that box is unlike opening any other. You are not tearing wrapping paper or flipping through a library book. You are parting time itself. Inside lies a collection of documents bound together by thread, arranged in folders worn with use. Sometimes you find exactly what you expected. Sometimes something you did not know you were looking for waits inside. Either way, the slip was the beginning. A small request, quietly made, now connects you to lives long gone. But the slip also reminds you of humility. You cannot ask for everything at once. There are limits, 2 boxes per day, 3 requests at a time, rules that force you to slow down, to savour, to work carefully. The archive does not rush. It does not bend to impatience. It teaches you that history unfolds not in bursts, but in increments. Each slip a step, each box a door. Scholars who have spent years in the reading room speak of the rhythm of this ritual. Slip, wait, receive, read, day after day, until a book is written, an argument made, a truth revealed. And they speak of the thrill when a slip, once delivered, returns with something extraordinary. A lost decree, an unpublished letter, a voice long thought gone. The slip is the bridge. Small, fragile, but powerful. In the end, the request slip is more than paper. It is a symbol. It represents the humility required to touch the past, the patience demanded by memory, the discipline of those who guard the archive. It reminds you that access is not a right but a privilege. And when the cart arrives, squeaking softly across the floor, you understand the weight of what you hold. It began with a slip. It ends with history in your hands. The shelves of the Vatican's archives do not only preserve letters of kings or pleas of martyrs, they also hold something quieter, more unsettling. Lists. Lists of books forbidden to be read, ideas judged too dangerous to circulate, authors silenced not by prison, but by ink. These are the indexes of prohibited books, centuries of control, bound in volumes that read less like catalogues and more like maps of fear. Open one, and you see names familiar and strange. Galileo, Copernicus, Voltaire, Rousseau. Works that today fill university shelves were once condemned as poison. To the church of past centuries, words could be as dangerous as armies. Ideas could corrode faith faster than swords could break walls. And so the lists grew, edition after edition, each entry a name crossed out from the acceptable world. But the archive also reveals how bans were not always absolute. Some works were permitted if corrected, passages blacked out, pages cut, lines rewritten. The church did not always destroy what it feared. Sometimes it sought to tame it. In the margins of certain manuscripts, you find the edits of censors, a phrase underlined in red, a comment scrawled beside it, a verdict that this line must go. These marginal marks, silent for centuries, are voices of suppression still visible to the eye. The paradox becomes clear as you turn these pages. The act of banning preserved what was banned. By cataloguing forbidden works, the church gave them longevity. By editing manuscripts, it revealed what it feared most. The archives do not just show what was silenced, they show us why. And that why is often more revealing than the ban itself. You imagine a scholar in the 16th century, a manuscript before him, a quill in hand. He is not writing his own ideas. He is erasing someone else's. Yet in doing so, he leaves his own trace, a mark in the margin that centuries later exposes the very censorship he thought invisible. The archive preserves both voices, the silenced and the silencer, and the index itself became a paradoxical text. To read it was to encounter, in one place, the most dangerous ideas of the age. Some readers surely treated it as a guide, a treasure map to forbidden thought. In trying to extinguish ideas, the index pointed to them with precision. The archive's shelves hold these lists like mirrors of anxiety, showing us what power once feared. By the 20th century, the index was abandoned. The Church no longer publishes lists of banned books, but the volumes remain in the archive, reminders of centuries when words could be crimes. They remind us how fragile freedom of thought once was, and how even today, suppression often reveals more than it conceals. The bans, the indexes, the edits, they live as testimony that fear of ideas can be as strong as fear of armies. And in the end, they show that ink, whether silenced or celebrated, always outlives the attempt to contain it. The official text is neat, careful, deliberate. But if you lean closer, if you let your eyes wander to the edges, you find another world. In the margins of Vatican manuscripts, voices whisper, scribes correcting mistakes, readers adding comments, censors drawing lines, margins that talk long after the main text has gone silent. It is easy to think of the archive as static, its pages fixed, but the margins tell a different story. They reveal that documents were living things, passed from hand to hand, each person leaving a trace. A decree from a pope might be copied in elegant Latin, but beside it, a nervous scribe might scrawl a note about a missing phrase. A monk centuries later might add a gloss, clarifying a difficult word. A censor might slice out a passage, leaving behind jagged edges that speak louder than the text itself. Some margins hold doodles, flowers, animals, even small faces drawn in moments of boredom. These playful marks remind us that scribes were human, not machines. They grew tired, they laughed. They left traces of their own lives beside the solemn words of kings and popes. In one sense, the margins betray imperfection. In another, they enrich the document, making it more alive. Other margins hold corrections of immense importance. A single altered date can shift the meaning of a treaty. A word crossed out can reverse a judgment. To historians, the margins are sometimes more valuable than the text. They reveal the struggle over meaning, the debate over words, the care or carelessness of those who preserved memory. Perhaps the most haunting margins are those of censorship. Thick black ink covering sentences. Whole paragraphs scraped away, the parchment scarred where words once lived. These silences are visible, and in their visibility they speak. They show the fear of the censor, the fragility of the text, the power of absence. The margins do not hide, they expose. To read margins is to hear the whispers of centuries. They are not polished speeches, but quiet interruptions. They remind us that history is not neat. It is layered, messy, constantly revised. Every reader becomes a participant, every mark a voice in conversation. The Vatican's archives preserve these voices as faithfully as the texts themselves, and in the end, the margins teach us humility. They remind us that no text is final, no decree beyond question, no manuscript beyond revision. The margins keep talking, and if you listen, they often reveal more truth than the words they surround. A wooden crate arrives in Rome, its edges worn from salt air, its hinges rusted from the damp hold of a ship that has crossed the ocean. Inside are letters, folded tight, their parchment smelling faintly of mould and sea. They come from lands that most Europeans of the 16th century could barely imagine. Islands where the sun is too bright, jungles where the air is thick, villages where bells never rang before missionaries carried them across the seas. These letters, now bound into quiet bundles, sit on the Vatican's shelves. They are voices from far shores, voices of priests and missionaries who sent word home to a church that sought to know what was happening in the world it claimed for faith. The letters are not uniform. Some are glowing, filled with the awe of discovery. They describe new plants, birds of colours never seen in Europe, languages that twisted the tongue and amazed the ear. One missionary writes of standing under stars so sharp they seemed like blades, another of watching rivers so wide they looked like seas. For these men, the New World was both terrifying and miraculous, and they struggled to capture it in ink that would cross the Atlantic and be read in rooms lined with marble. But the letters also tell of hardship. They describe fever that cut through settlements, hunger that gnawed when ships arrived late, resistance from local communities who did not welcome the cross and chalice. They speak of baptisms by the hundreds and of deaths by the thousands. Some lines sound triumphant, others read like confessions of failure. The letters reveal the contradictions of empire, the desire to save souls entangled with the thirst for wealth and power. One letter from a missionary in Japan marvels at the intelligence and discipline of the people, praising their poetry, their customs, their honour. He believes they are ready for conversion, destined to become a stronghold of the faith. Yet only a few decades later, another letter from the same region laments the violent suppression of Christians, the destruction of churches, the scattering of believers. The archive holds both voices, side by side, showing how quickly hope turned to ashes. In South America, letters describe entire villages brought into the fold, the ringing of bells marking new beginnings. But they also describe forced labour, resistance crushed, cultures erased. The missionaries write as if they are chroniclers of a divine mission, but the pages, read centuries later, reveal shadows. Behind the victories are losses too vast to measure. Behind each conversion is a silence where old traditions vanished. The letters also carry an unexpected intimacy. Missionaries far from home write of loneliness, of longing for familiar voices. Some describe dreams of walking again through Roman streets, of tasting bread baked in their childhood towns. They are not only voices of conquest, they are voices of exile. These men gave their lives to distant shores, and their only connection to the world they left was the letters they sent across the ocean. The Vatican collected these letters not out of sentiment, but out of necessity. They were reports meant to inform decisions, to measure progress, to guide policy. They became data before data existed, charts of souls gained or lost, records of funds requested, strategies proposed. But in their cold utility, they preserved something unintended, the human cost of expansion. They preserved awe, fear, wonder, grief. Reading them today, you feel the distance they travelled. They are still damp with salt, still heavy with the weight of oceans. They remind you that history is not only made in courts and palaces, but in villages, on riverbanks, under foreign skies, where lonely men scratched ink into parchment. Their words travelled thousands of miles, and now they sit in silence, waiting for modern eyes to find them again. The far shores are closer now, but the voices remain distant, echoing across centuries through the fragile bridge of letters. The Vatican's archives are not only filled with letters of faith and pleas of martyrs. They are also filled with numbers, ledgers, receipts, contracts paper that does not sing of miracles but of money. For behind every crusade, every cathedral, every mission, there was gold. Behind every papal bull was a transaction, and the archives, in their quiet honesty, preserve this too. Open a ledger from the 15th century, and you find lists of names and amounts. A noble family donates to secure favour. A guild of merchants pays to receive blessings on their trade. A kingdom sends gold to Rome in exchange for recognition of a crown. The handwriting is neat, the sums large. The paper does not speak of prayer. It speaks of power. Some of these records are blunt. They describe indulgences sold, money given in exchange for the remission of sins. Whole communities emptied their purses to secure salvation for their dead. These pages are uncomfortable to read because they show the raw commerce of belief. The numbers do not lie. They tell us what faith cost when measured in coin. Other documents reveal the financing of wars. Popes blessed armies not only with words but with funds. They borrowed from bankers in Florence, from families like the Medici, whose fortunes intertwined with papal power. The archive shows contracts signed with shaky hands, interest rates negotiated, promises made, faith and finance, tangled like threads in a tapestry, impossible to separate. But money flowed both ways. The Vatican received, but it also gave. It funded missions to the Americas, expeditions to the East, relief for starving regions, ransoms for prisoners of war. The paper shows the Church as banker of both mercy and ambition. One page records the purchase of grain to feed a famine-struck town. Another records payments to mercenaries sent to crush rebellion. The ledgers reveal something else too, transparency mixed with secrecy. Some transactions are detailed to the last coin, others are vague, described only as for special use, for urgent matters, for His Holiness's discretion. The ambiguity is deliberate, protecting decisions that could not be public. These vague lines are as revealing as the detailed ones. They show the areas where power hid behind paper. To read these financial records is to see the Vatican not only as a spiritual authority, but as an empire of money. Gold flowed in from every corner of Christendom, and the archives show where it went. Some was spent on beauty art, music, architecture that still amazes. Some was spent on war, power, survival. The Church preached eternity, but it managed money with the precision of a bank. And yet, even in the ledgers, humanity breaks through. Marginal notes complain of debtors who delay payment, of kings who promise but do not deliver, of merchants who cheat. Behind the neat numbers is frustration, exasperation, even humour. A scribe writes, almost sarcastically, "The king's gold is as late as ever." These voices remind us that behind the grand facade of finance were ordinary men keeping track, weary from chasing coins across kingdoms. The Vatican's archives show us that history is not made only of battles or prayers. It is made of paper, stamped and signed, that reveals the constant negotiation between power and money. Without these ledgers, the Church could not have endured, and neither could its monuments. To look at them is to confront the reality that faith was always financed, that salvation was entangled with commerce, that power was written not only in ink but in numbers. The shelves hold thousands of files, each bound in thread, each carrying a single name. These are the causes for canonization, the trials of saints. They are not hagiographies written in shining language. They are investigations, interrogations, tests. The Church does not make saints lightly. It makes them through paper, through scrutiny, through doubt. Open one of these files and you find testimonies. Witnesses called to describe miracles, to recount virtues, to tell whether a candidate for sainthood truly lived a holy life. The testimonies are detailed, almost forensic. A farmer swears that his crops grew after praying to a holy woman. A mother testifies that her child was healed at a shrine. A doctor is asked to explain whether there is any natural cause. The process is methodical, slow, skeptical. The archives reveal that doubt is built into sanctity. For every testimony of a miracle, there are questions, cross-examinations, demands for proof. Some candidates pass this test, others do not. The files show saints who almost were men and women venerated by their communities, but denied official recognition because the evidence was not strong enough. Their names linger in the archives, half forgotten, holy to some, doubtful to others. One file describes a woman known for visions. Her neighbours swore she spoke with angels. But the testimonies also reveal conflicts, claims that she sought attention, that she manipulated followers. The investigation ended without canonization. Another file describes a priest beloved for charity, but accused of harshness in private. The archive preserves both praise and criticism, refusing to let sanctity stand unexamined. Even those who became saints carry the weight of this process. Their files contain the doubts, the rejections, the debates. Behind every canonization is a story of resistance. Saints were not chosen because they were perfect. They were chosen because their imperfections were weighed, tested, and found overcome. The archive preserves the struggle, the doubt that sharpened their light. These trials also reveal the politics of sainthood. Some candidates rose faster because of royal support, because kings or queens pressed their cause. Others languished for centuries, their cases delayed by lack of influence. The archive is honest about this too. Marginal notes hint at hesitation, at pressure, at the delicate balance between holiness and politics. To read these files is to realize that sainthood is not only about miracles. It is about memory, community, persistence. It is about how the Church chooses to tell its own story. The archive shows us saints not as shining icons, but as people whose lives were questioned, doubted, tested. And in those doubts lies their humanity. The Vatican's archives remind us that sanctity is not beyond suspicion. It is forged through it. Saints are not made in silence. They are made in trials, on paper, with witnesses called and questions asked. Their holiness endures, not because it was unquestioned, but because it was tested and survived. And the paper that records those trials preserves not only the saints, but the doubts that shaped them. It is easy to confuse the two, the Vatican Library and the Vatican Archives. They sit close together, their walls thick with history, their doors guarded with the same quiet formality. But once you cross the threshold, the difference is unmistakable. The library is a place of learning, open to scholars, where books line shelves in tall stacks and manuscripts glow under careful lights. The archive, by contrast, is a vault, a place of memory preserved not for curiosity but for proof. To walk from one to the other is to walk from possibility into judgment. The library has always carried a certain romance. Scholars describe the smell of vellum, the glitter of illuminated manuscripts, the beauty of Renaissance bindings displayed with pride. It is a place where knowledge is celebrated. In the reading rooms, you hear whispers in many languages, the shuffling of papers, the soft creak of chairs. Visitors come to learn, to absorb, to wander. There is freedom in the library. You may not handle everything, but the doors are open to more than the privileged few. The archive does not carry romance. It carries weight. Here, you do not wander, you request. You do not browse shelves, you wait for carts. You do not explore possibility, you chase certainty. The library is full of books that inspire imagination, ideas, dreams. The archive is filled with boxes that pin history down, box by box, file by file, stripping imagination away until only fact remains. And yet, they are bound together. The same spirit of preservation runs through both. The monks who copied manuscripts for the library also copied decrees for the archive. The popes who gathered texts for wisdom also guarded documents for authority. The two institutions mirror each other like twin towers, one reaching for beauty, the other for memory. In the library, you find colour. In the archive, you find silence. In the library, you discover ancient maps of worlds once unknown. In the archive, you discover the letters that carved those worlds into kingdoms. The library invites you to dream. The archive forces you to remember. Together, they form the mind of the Vatican imagination on one side, discipline on the other. It is tempting to think of them as opposites, but in truth they are partners. A scholar might trace a story in the library, say, a medieval atlas of the New World, and then confirm its impact in the archive, in a bull that divided oceans. A researcher might read Augustine in the library, and then step into the archive to see how Augustine's words were enforced in law. The two complement each other, knowledge and authority dancing across a narrow street. The library next door is brighter, more famous, often photographed. The archive remains in shadow, its treasures whispered about but rarely seen, yet they are part of the same body. The Vatican could not have one without the other. knowledge without memory drifts into fantasy. Memory without knowledge hardens into stone. Only together do they hold the fullness of history. To walk between them is to feel that balance. You leave the echoing halls of the library, where books invite you to touch centuries of thought. You step into the quiet weight of the archive, where a single box can rewrite what you thought you knew. The door between them may be small, but the distance feels immense. The library feeds the imagination, the archive tests it, and both, standing side by side, remind us that the pursuit of truth is never simple. It requires beauty and discipline, wonder and order, dreams and proof. A folded document lies on the table, bound not with thread but with wax. The seal is red, thick, unbroken, pressed with the imprint of a ring that once sat on a pope's finger. It glows faintly in the light, its edges cracked with age. The wax is fragile, but it still whispers authority. Seals are more than decoration. They are locks in plain sight. They are the Vatican's way of saying, "This is real. This is ours." In the archives, seals appear everywhere. Bulls are sealed with lead, heavy and grey, stamped with the image of St. Peter and St. Paul. Letters carry wax seals in red, green, black, colours that mark status and urgency. Some seals are elaborate, with coats of arms and intricate designs. Others are plain, hurried, slapped onto parchment before a messenger left in haste. Each seal was once a key. To break it was to open more than paper, it was to open the will of the one who sealed it. Archivists treat seals with reverence. They study the details under magnifying glasses, tracing cracks, comparing imprints to others. A broken seal may mean a letter was tampered with. An unusual seal may hint at fraud. Each one is as much a signature as the ink itself, proof that the words came from power. In the archive, seals are guardians. They hold truth intact. But there are other keys, less visible. Metal keys that open cabinets, boxes, and vaults. The Vatican guards its archives, not only with rules but with locks. Some rooms require more than one key, carried by more than one person, so no single hand can open them. This system is deliberate. Power is divided, trust distributed. The archive does not yield itself easily. The combination of seals and keys reveals a paradox. On the one hand, the Church preserved memory with openness, copying documents, storing them carefully. On the other hand, it locked that memory tight, controlling who could see, who could touch, who could know. The seal was proof of truth, but it was also a barrier. The key was a tool of access, but also of exclusion. Together, they remind us that history is both revealed and hidden, both accessible and guarded. Some seals in the archive have never been broken. Letters remain folded, wax intact, waiting for a hand bold enough to crack them open. The Vatican allows some to remain sealed forever, honouring privacy, respecting promises. Others have been opened only recently, their contents shaking long-held assumptions. Each seal carries a question: what lies beneath, and who has the right to see? The keys, too, are symbolic. To hold one is to carry responsibility. Archivists who unlock cabinets do so not casually, but with ritual care. A turn of the wrist, a click of tumblers, a door opening onto centuries of memory. The moment is small, but its significance is vast, because every key in the Vatican does more than open metal. It opens the past. In this way, the archive is a fortress, not only of paper, but of trust. Seals and keys guard it, layer upon layer. They remind us that memory is fragile, that it must be protected, but they also remind us that power always decides what is preserved, what is opened, what is locked. And when you see the seals glowing red in the dim light, when you hear the soft click of keys turning in ancient locks, you understand history is never free. It is always sealed. It is always keyed. It always waits for someone to open it if they are allowed. You sit at your desk in the reading room, the slip filled out, the box requested. Hours pass. Finally, the cart arrives, pushed by an archivist. But when the box is placed before you, it is different. It carries a tag. It is closed with string, bound tighter than the others. And on its cover, a word you did not expect: embargoed. Not every file in the Vatican's archive is available. Some are closed by time, some by privacy, some by decision. You cannot open them, no matter how much you ask. The reasons vary. Some files contain information about people still alive, whose reputations would be shattered. Others involve diplomatic secrets, too delicate even now. Some are simply waiting for their time, sealed by rule until decades pass. A box that will not open is a reminder that history is not always ready to speak. The frustration of scholars is palpable. They travel across oceans, wait for approval, sit in the hushed reading room, only to find the file they need is locked. The archivist shrugs politely. Rules are rules, access denied. The researcher writes their notes with a hole in the story, a gap that may never be filled. The box remains closed, but there is something revealing in what cannot be opened. The very fact of embargo speaks loudly. Why this file? Why now? Why so long? The questions haunt as much as the absence. Some boxes carry dates. Available in 2050, available after 100 years. These numbers hang in the air like promises or like threats. They tell us that history is measured not only in events, but in the timing of revelation. Sometimes, embargoed files open suddenly by papal order. In 2020, Pope Francis ordered the wartime archives of Pius XII to be opened decades earlier than expected. The boxes that had refused to open suddenly did, and the world surged in to read. The result was not clarity but debate. Still, the act of opening mattered. It showed that silence, however long, can one day end. And yet, many boxes remain stubbornly closed. Scholars whisper about them, speculate, imagine. Rumours grow in the absence of access. Perhaps they contain proof of scandal, corruption, betrayal. Perhaps they contain nothing more than administrative letters, dull and ordinary. Without access, no one knows, and so the imagination feeds itself in the dark. The box that will not open is a symbol of power. It reminds you that archives are not neutral. They are curated, controlled, released on terms set by authority. The documents inside exist, but until you can touch them, they are only shadows. They may change everything, or nothing at all, but you cannot know. You must wait. In that waiting lies the paradox of the Vatican's memory. It is preserved, but not always shared. It is there, but not always seen. The unopened box sits before you like a locked confession, a truth held back until the gatekeeper decides otherwise. You can write about what is missing, but you cannot fill the gap. The silence remains, and that silence is powerful. It shapes stories as much as words do. The unopened box becomes legend, its contents imagined, debated, and feared. It becomes a mirror, reflecting more about our curiosity than about its own truth. And perhaps that is the most haunting lesson. Sometimes what we cannot open speaks louder than what we can. In the shelves of the Vatican's archives, there are papers that once carried the full weight of authority against discovery. They are not myths, not rumours, but real ink on real parchment. They are decrees and letters, written when science began to stretch beyond what faith felt comfortable holding. These papers remind us that the history of knowledge is not only one of breakthroughs and triumphs, it is also one of suspicion, conflict, and fear. The 17th century was an age of upheaval. Telescopes revealed a universe larger than the one taught by tradition. Anatomists opened bodies and found truths that contradicted to accepted philosophy. Mathematicians calculated with precision that unsettled old ideas. The Vatican was not blind to this. It read the books, heard the arguments, received the petitions, and often its response was measured in bans and warnings. The archive holds these records in plain boxes, the handwriting neat, the tone calm, but the implications immense. Here lies the condemnation of Copernicus's work, De Revolutionibus, not because it lacked brilliance, but because it suggested the earth moved around the Sunday. The decree is careful, not fiery. It states that the book may be read only with corrections, certain passages altered to fit acceptable teaching. The words are restrained, but between the lines is a struggle. How to balance truth with tradition, discovery with doctrine. Another file contains correspondence about dissections, questions about whether opening bodies violated the sanctity of creation. Some letters are hesitant, others more pragmatic, pointing out the benefits of medical knowledge. The debate moves back and forth, never fully silencing curiosity, but never fully embracing it either. The archive preserves this tension as carefully as it preserves the ink. One of the most telling documents is not dramatic at all. It is a list, a record of books placed on the index of prohibited works. Alongside theological tracts and philosophical musings are titles that today we call science. Astronomy, medicine, natural philosophy, all judged dangerous, all locked behind the gate of prohibition. To read the list now is to feel the friction of an age when the universe was expanding faster than tradition could hold it. But the archive also tells another side of the story. It preserves letters from scholars pleading for clarity, arguing that their work was not heretical but observational. Some beg for exceptions, some defend themselves with humility, others with defiance. The Vatican responded in many ways, sometimes with correction, sometimes with silence, sometimes with condemnation. The archive shows both sides the fear of authority and the courage of curiosity. What emerges is not a simple story of suppression. It is more complex, more human. The Church feared losing control over truth. Scholars feared losing their lives or reputations. Between them was paper, letters back and forth, decrees written, corrections demanded. And centuries later, the archive holds both the restraint and the resistance. The shadows of science are not just about what was banned. They are about how knowledge survived despite the bans. Many works condemned in these files were still copied, still read, still circulated quietly. The very act of prohibition gave them power. By marking them dangerous, the Vatican ensured that curiosity would cling to them. The archive thus preserves not only acts of restriction, but also the seeds of defiance. To read these documents today is to stand at the crossroads of fear and discovery. You feel the unease of those who clung to old truths, and you feel the courage of those who reached for new ones. The archive does not resolve the tension. It holds it, line by line, reminding us that knowledge does not move in a straight line. It stumbles, resists, adapts, and the shadows cast in those centuries still fall on us now. Not all that passed through the Vatican's hands was official. Alongside papal bulls and royal treaties are documents far more fragile. Letters whispered between spies, informants, agents who worked in the shadows of politics. The Vatican was not only a spiritual power, it was also an information hub, connected by networks of priests, merchants, envoys, and travellers. And the archive, surprisingly, preserves these whispers. One file might contain a report from a priest stationed in Venice, describing conversations overheard in taverns, rumours of warships gathering, whispers of alliances forming. Another holds notes from merchants in Constantinople, writing about the shifting strength of the Ottoman Empire. Still another contains coded letters from Paris, detailing the intrigues of French courts, the ambitions of nobles, the weaknesses of kings. These are not grand decrees. They are fragments of gossip elevated by proximity to power. The Vatican prized this information. It had no armies to rival kingdoms, no fleets to dominate seas. But it had ears everywhere. Missionaries wrote back not only about souls but about politics. Bishops reported not only on faith but on rumour. Every scrap of knowledge mattered. And in the archive, those scraps became part of the larger fabric of decision-making. Some letters are written in code, simple substitutions of letters, sometimes more complex ciphers, that require careful work to unravel. Marginal notes by archivists centuries later reveal attempts to crack these codes, to preserve the meaning hidden beneath. Others are written in cautious language, phrases that seem innocuous until you realize their weight. A line about merchants with unusual cargo might mean weapons. A reference to visitors from the East might mean envoys of hostile powers. These whisper networks often shaped papal decisions. Should a treaty be signed? Should a bishop be recalled? Should the church prepare for persecution in one land or expansion in another? The archive shows how intelligence, gathered quietly, influenced choices loudly proclaimed. But the whispers also reveal the fragility of information. Some reports are wrong, exaggerated, based on rumour or fear. Others are remarkably precise. The Vatican had to weigh them all, never certain which whisper carried truth and which carried deception. The archive shows this uncertainty too. In some files, notes in the margins question the reliability of a source, casting doubt even as the letter was preserved. The Whisper Network reminds us that history is not made only of public speeches. It is made in corridors, in hushed conversations, in letters written quickly and smuggled across borders. The archive holds these fragile pieces, giving us a glimpse into the hidden streams of knowledge that once flowed into Rome. And when you read them, you realize how much of history was shaped not by certainty, but by whispers in the dark. The Vatican's archive is vast, but it is not whole. For every box that survives, there are others that are gone. Some were stolen, like those taken by Napoleon. Some were scattered, lost to time. But many were destroyed by fire, flames that devoured centuries of memory in a single night. To walk the archive is to feel not only what remains, but what is missing. In the 15th century, a blaze tore through part of the Vatican Palace. Records from earlier centuries were consumed, their ashes carried into the Roman air. Chroniclers describe the smoke rising above the city, the panic of archivists trying to rescue what they could. Some boxes were thrown from windows, their contents scattered in courtyards. Some were carried by hand into safer rooms. But much was lost, never to be seen again. Other fires came later, smaller but just as devastating. A candle tipped over in a scribe's chamber, a torch held too close to parchment. Each time, the flames erased what careful hands had preserved. The archive we see today is not only a collection, it is a survivor. What was lost, no one knows for certain. But gaps in the record speak louder than words. Whole stretches of medieval correspondence are missing. Letters from early councils are gone. Some papal registers, which should have continued seamlessly, break off abruptly, resuming years later as if history itself had paused. These silences are the scars of fire. The archive acknowledges these losses. Catalogues mark them with notes, destroyed by fire, missing since the conflagration. The words are plain, almost indifferent, but behind them is grief. For archivists, loss is personal. To spend a life preserving memory and then watch flames consume it is to feel history slipping through your fingers. The archive carries this grief quietly, in the spaces where boxes should be, and yet, even in destruction, something survives. Fragments rescued from flames, half-burned pages, scorched bindings, singed letters. These are preserved too, fragile but still legible. They are reminders that even in fire, memory resists. One charred document still bears the seal of a pope, the wax cracked but visible. These fragments whisper through their damage. We were almost gone, but not entirely. To walk the archive is to walk among survivors and ghosts. The shelves are full, but they are not complete. Behind the order lies absence, behind the silence lies fire, and the fires remind us of the fragility of memory. For all its stone walls and iron locks, history is always vulnerable. A single flame can undo centuries of care. The Vatican's archive is therefore not only a monument to preservation, it is a testament to loss. It teaches us to value what survives, to listen closely to fragments, to honour the silence where voices once were. The fires that erased also teach us humility. They remind us that no archive is eternal, no memory indestructible. And in the quiet halls, where boxes line shelves in endless rows, you feel the ghosts of flames still flickering in the gaps. The archive is filled with letters that praise, plead, and confess. But some of the most unsettling are the ones that betray. They are the reports of informants, the testimonies of spies, the quiet confessions, written not for truth but for survival. Betrayal seeps through parchment here, carried in words meant to save one life while condemning another. One box holds transcripts from the Inquisition. The handwriting is steady, the ink dark, the pages neatly numbered, but what they record is anything but neat. Neighbours accusing neighbours, apprentices denouncing masters, family members turning against their own blood. A whispered heresy becomes a written charge. A doubt expressed in private becomes evidence on paper. And once it is written, the betrayal cannot be undone. The testimonies often begin with hesitation. I did not wish to speak, but my conscience forced me. Or, I fear I may be guilty if I remain silent. But beneath the pious phrasing lies the fear of being accused next, the fear of the flames. Betrayal became survival. And survival meant pointing a finger before someone pointed at you. The archive preserves these betrayals in chilling clarity. Some files hold letters written by priests who served as informants, reporting to Rome about the behaviour of their communities. They describe conversations overheard, doubts expressed, rumours of unorthodox gatherings. Their words carry weight not because they are always true, but because they were believed. A priest's letter could tip the balance of a trial. The archive makes no judgment. It simply preserves the words. Other betrayals came from within courts and palaces. Ambassadors wrote reports not only about political affairs, but also about the private lives of rulers. Some letters detail kings' secret negotiations. Others expose queens' indiscretions. These betrayals were not whispered in the dark, but carried across borders under seals of secrecy. And in the Vatican, they became tools of diplomacy, stored carefully in boxes that now tell stories of trust broken and loyalties bought. What makes these documents so haunting is their permanence. Betrayal is often fleeting, a word spoken in haste, a choice made under pressure. But once written, it becomes eternal. The archive preserves the words long after the betrayer and the betrayed are gone. Generations later, we read them and feel the sting of the moment. The paper holds not just ink, but the echo of broken trust. And yet, even betrayal has its layers. Some letters reveal false accusations, written to settle grudges or gain advantage. Others show reluctant witnesses forced to testify, their words shaped by fear. The archive captures the complexity. Betrayal is not always malicious. Sometimes it is desperate. Sometimes it is coerced. Sometimes it is as much a wound to the betrayer as to the betrayed. In these halls, betrayal does not die. It lingers in boxes, waiting to be unfolded again. It reminds us that history is not only shaped by courage, but also by fear, not only by loyalty, but also by the moments when loyalty broke. And in the silence of the reading room, as you hold a letter that condemned a man centuries ago, you feel the weight of betrayal still pressing through time. There are moments when history is not only written, it is signed with blood. The Vatican's archive holds decrees, treaties, and letters that changed the fate of kingdoms. But hidden among them are documents that carry a more visceral weight. Confessions written under torture, agreements signed at sword point, verdicts delivered that sent men to their deaths. These pages are stained not with visible blood, but with its invisible presence. The trials of the Knights Templar live in these boxes. Their downfall in the early 14th century is recorded in transcripts, testimonies, written in Latin, line after line, describing supposed heresies and blasphemies. The words seem cold, detached, legal. But behind them were men chained, beaten, coerced. The ink was guided not by free thought, but by fear of pain. The archive preserves these confessions with chilling neutrality. You read them knowing they were spoken under duress, and yet for centuries they carried the weight of truth. Other documents record verdicts of excommunication, sentences of execution, decrees that sealed the fates of individuals and entire communities. A pope's bull declaring a kingdom outside the church's grace was more than words. It meant armies would march, taxes would be cut off, lives would be lost, and yet, in the archive, it is only paper. The violence it unleashed is silent, hidden between the lines. Inquisition records reveal the mechanics of interrogation, questions repeated, answers demanded, scribes recording every word. The ink moves steadily, unemotional, as if the scribe were deaf to the cries of the accused. But you know the cries were there. They echo invisibly in the margins. The paper becomes a veil, hiding the pain but never erasing it. The archive also preserves documents signed in moments of surrender. A king agreeing to humiliating terms after defeat. A city promising tribute after a siege. These signatures are as much blood as ink, forced by circumstance, sealed under duress. They reveal the fragility of power, the way ink can capture the moment when pride breaks and survival takes its place. Some documents are physically stained, margins smudged, blotches where ink mixed with sweat or tears. A parchment folded too tightly shows the tremor of the hand that wrote it. These traces are subtle but powerful. They remind you that behind the legal language were human bodies, fragile and suffering. Ink and blood are not opposites here. They are bound together. The archive does not only preserve words, it preserves the cost of those words. To hold one of these documents is to feel the silence of a courtroom, the weight of chains, the finality of a verdict. It is to know that history is not only a story of ideas, but of bodies broken in the service of those ideas. And yet, the archive also transforms these tragedies into lessons. By preserving the ink, it forces us to confront the blood. By keeping the documents intact, it refuses to let us forget what was paid for authority, for belief, for survival. The silence of the archive is not denial. It is a demand that we remember. There is a room in the archive that feels different from the others. Instead of boxes filled with letters, it holds vast sheets of parchment, carefully rolled or stretched across wooden frames. They are maps, hand-drawn worlds that once guided explorers, armies, and popes. To stand in this room is to feel the weight of the world as it was once imagined. The maps are not only geography, they are theology, politics, ambition. Oceans are vast and empty, filled with drawings of sea monsters. Continents are distorted, stretched, or compressed according to rumour and guesswork. Borders are marked not by rivers or mountains, but by papal decrees. In one map, the New World is divided neatly between Spain and Portugal, a straight line across a continent neither kingdom had yet fully seen. The ink declares ownership long before reality could. Some maps are beautiful, works of art as much as tools. Gold leaf highlights coasts, blue paint deepens seas, intricate compass roses mark directions. Ships sail across waves, banners fly, angels hover over cities. They are visions of the world filled with symbolism, where theology and geography intertwine. Other maps are stark, functional, drawn quickly to guide armies or missionaries. They mark towns with crosses, roads with lines, rivers with curves. Their simplicity is deceptive. A single line might mean the difference between victory and defeat, between famine and supply. These maps were power on parchment, and the Vatican guarded them as carefully as it guarded treaties. But the maps also reveal ignorance. Vast blank spaces mark areas unknown, labelled only with words like terra incognita. These empty regions are as fascinating as the details. They show us what was not known, what was imagined, what was feared. To stand before these maps is to feel the mixture of knowledge and mystery that defined exploration. Some maps are deeply political. They show how the Vatican mediated disputes between kingdoms, dividing lands across oceans with strokes of ink. The Treaty of Tordesillas, drawn onto maps, split the world between Spain and Portugal. The maps in the archive show how authority tried to impose order on chaos, carving reality with lines that often ignored the people already living there. The Room of Maps is a reminder that the world we know today was once uncertain, contested, to fluid. Borders we take for granted were once just ideas sketched in ink. Whole continents were drawn wrong, distorted by rumour or desire, and yet those maps guided ships, armies, and missions. They shaped the course of history, even when they were wrong. To trace your finger across these maps is to feel the ambition of centuries. You see how men in Rome imagined the world, how they sought to control it, how they filled the unknown with faith and fear. The maps are not just records, they are dreams, visions of power drawn on parchment, and in the silence of the archive, they still glow faintly with the force of those dreams. The archive does not only preserve what was said, it preserves what was not. Silence fills these shelves just as much as paper. Boxes marked with dates that should contain correspondence, but do not. Files that begin with a voice and end in abrupt quiet. Whole decades that fade into blankness. This silence is not absence. It is presence. It is deliberate. There are many reasons for it. Some silences were created by lost fires, theft, floods that carried memory away. Others were created by choice documents destroyed because they were too dangerous, too embarrassing, too threatening to be preserved. Some silences come from the rules of access. Papers locked for decades or centuries may as well not exist, their words swallowed in the meantime by time itself. For scholars, the gaps are as frustrating as the files, and yet they are often more telling. Consider the letters of Galileo. We know many of them survive. They are studied, quoted, published, but there are hints of others' letters referenced but not found, exchanges with cardinals that simply vanish from the record. The silence around them is its own testimony. Did they never exist? Were they destroyed? Or do they still wait in unopened boxes, sealed until the day comes when the gatekeepers choose to release them? No answer is given. The silence endures. Or take the period of war in the 20th century. Scholars pore over the archives of Pius XII, eager to know what the Vatican knew, when it knew it, what it chose to do. Many files have been opened, yet others are not. A folder marked with a promising title might contain only one letter or none at all. The silence is maddening, but it is also powerful. It tells us what the Church chose to reveal and what it chose to hold back. Silence in the archive functions like shadow in art. It shapes the light. The documents we do have are framed by the gaps we do not. And those gaps invite imagination, speculation, conspiracy. They create stories of lost gospels, hidden truths, forbidden knowledge. Sometimes these stories are fantasy. Sometimes they are closer to truth than anyone admits, but all of them are born in silence. Archivists speak of this with a certain resignation. Their duty is to preserve what exists, not to chase what does not. Yet even they admit that silence is never neutral. A missing document is as much a decision as a preserved one. A sealed file is as much a message as an open one. Silence has weight, and it shapes history. To sit in the reading room, staring at an empty reference in a catalogue, is to feel that weight pressing down. The silence is not quiet. It hums. It reminds you that history is never complete, that memory is always partial, that truth can be buried as easily as it can be recorded. And the archive, for all its vastness, is not immune to forgetting. The weight of silence is heavier than any box. It forces you to acknowledge that what you know is not all their island. It forces you to sit with uncertainty, to imagine the stories that might never be told. And in that uncertainty lies the archive's most haunting lesson. History is not only about what survives. It is also about what is missing, what was silenced, what we are not allowed to hear. For centuries, the Vatican's archives have been tended not by crowds, but by a select few. They are the guardians, men who dedicate their lives to preserving memory, to controlling access, to ensuring that what is written endures. They are not often in the spotlight. Their names rarely appear in history books. But without them, the shelves would collapse into chaos, the documents crumble into dust, the archive itself vanish into irrelevance. The guardians are archivists, paleographers, cataloguers. They work quietly, often in shadow, their tools not swords or staffs, but gloves and magnifying glasses. Their enemies are not armies, but time, moisture, insects, negligence. They fight by cleaning, repairing, cataloguing. They preserve the fragile bridge between centuries. And in doing so, they hold immense, if hidden, power. Every box that leaves the shelves to be placed before a scholar's hands passes through them. Every slip approved or denied is judged by them. They decide what is available, what is too fragile, what is too sensitive. Their decisions shape the stories historians tell. A generous archivist can open doors. A strict one can close them forever. The guardians are also interpreters. They know the catalogues, the codes, the labyrinthine organisation of the shelves. Without their guidance, a researcher could drown in paper. With it, a path appears. They hold the keys to memory, not only literally, but intellectually. They know where to look, what to request, what connections to make. Scholars speak of archivists with respect, even awe. Without them, no book could be written, no history uncovered. Yet their role is not purely service, it is also defence. The Vatican's archivists are protectors of privacy as much as they are custodians of history. They stand guard over sensitive material, ensuring it does not fall into the wrong hands. They enforce embargoes, restrict access, remind researchers that the archive is not a free-for-all. Their loyalty is to the institution as much as to truth. This dual allegiance between preservation and protection makes them figures of both trust and suspicion. Some guardians have left their mark more visibly. In the 19th century, Cardinal Mai worked tirelessly to uncover ancient texts in the archive, piecing together fragments of classical works long thought lost. His discoveries made him famous, his name remembered. Others, less known, laboured for decades in silence, never recognised, yet essential to the survival of memory. The guardians also carry their own secrets. Not all archivists agree on what should be open or closed, what should be preserved or discarded. Some have been accused of hiding too much, of placing loyalty to the church above loyalty to history. Others have been praised for quietly allowing more access, bending rules to help scholars. Their choices are etched invisibly into the history of research, shaping what we know and what we do not. To imagine the archive without its guardians is to imagine a ruined city, dust covering unreadable parchments, mould devouring paper, catalogues lost, order forgotten. It is their quiet, often invisible labour that allows the archive to function. They are the ones who touch the fragile pages, who breathe in the dust of centuries, who dedicate lifetimes to memory they do not own. In the end, the guardians are as much part of the archive as the boxes themselves. They are the living presence in the silent halls, the hands that protect, the voices that guide. Without them, the locked doors would mean nothing. The shelves would crumble, the silence would swallow everything. They are the bridge between past and present, between paper and knowledge, between secrecy and revelation. And, like the archive itself, they stand watch, quiet but unyielding, holding history in their care. At the farthest end of the archive, beyond the shelves and catalogues, beyond the reading rooms and the guards, lies a door most will never see. It is not marked with signs. It is not photographed for tourists. It is plain, heavy, unassuming. But it carries a weight different from all the others. It is the last door, the one that symbolizes all the questions that cannot be answered, all the mysteries that remain sealed. No one outside the highest levels of the Vatican knows exactly what lies beyond. Some say it is only more boxes, more paper, nothing unusual. Others whisper that it is where the most sensitive documents are kept, files too dangerous to release, truths that would shake faith and power if revealed. The reality may be less dramatic, or perhaps more. The power of the last door lies not in what it holds, but in the fact that it remains closed. For centuries, writers and filmmakers have imagined what might be inside. Lost Gospels that tell a different story of Christ. Proof of secret dealings with empires. Records of betrayals never confessed. Theories grow wild in the absence of access. And yet, the door remains silent. To stand before it, if you are ever allowed, is to feel history pressing against wood and iron. It is to know that even here, in the greatest archive of the Church, not everything is yours to see. There will always be a boundary, a threshold you cannot cross. The last door embodies that truth, and perhaps that is the final lesson of the Vatican's forbidden archives. They are not a treasure chest to be emptied. They are a mirror, reflecting both the power of memory and the limits of access. They give, but they also withhold. They preserve, but they also conceal. They remind us that truth is never total, that history is always incomplete, that silence and secrecy are as much a part of the story as revelation. The last door is not simply a barrier, it is a symbol. It tells us that there will always be more than we know, that mystery endures, that faith and power keep their secrets even as they share their records. And in that enduring mystery lies both frustration and wonder. As you leave the archive, climbing back into the light of Rome, the memory of the last door follows you. It whispers that history is not finished, that secrets remain, that silence still guards truths waiting in the dark, and whether those truths are ever revealed is not up to you. The last door decides. Some of the most unsettling files in the archive are not decrees or treaties but prophecies, not official doctrine, but predictions written in fragile script, carried through centuries with a mixture of fear and fascination. These are not the vague fortunes of street prophets. They are letters, visions, testimonies that claim to speak of futures shaped by divine will. And in the Vatican, they were read, weighed, sometimes hidden. One box contains manuscripts attributed to saints and mystics, visions of wars and famines, of kingdoms rising and falling. Some are strangely accurate, describing events that later unfolded. Others drift into strangeness, worlds that never came to pass. The archive does not tell us which were believed and which were dismissed. It simply preserves them all, as if acknowledging that even failed prophecies are part of history. The most famous among these are the so-called Secrets of Fatima. 3 visions, reported by children in Portugal in 1917, describing war, persecution, and a final message held in secrecy for decades. When at last the third secret was revealed, it described a vision of violence against a pope. Some believe it referred to the attempt on John Paul II's life. Others believe it was a fragment of something larger, withheld by choice. The archive holds the original text, handwritten, folded, sealed. For years it lay locked, its silence feeding speculation. But these are not the only prophecies. There are medieval texts that speak of a black pope who would preside over the end of days, of Rome burning, of the church fractured beyond repair. There are letters describing visions of comets, plagues, and cities drowned in water. Some prophecies are written with trembling faith, others with calculated intent, designed to warn or to influence. The archive received them all. Why preserve them? Perhaps because even false prophecies shape reality. Belief in them moves kings, terrifies populations, inspires reform. The Church, wary of their power, chose not always to destroy, but to contain. Locked in boxes, the words lost their public fire, but retained their silent influence. Scholars opening these files today can trace how fear of prophecy shaped decisions. A king delaying war because a mystic warned against it. A pope altering policy because a vision described divine anger. These whispers echo across the parchment. Yet prophecy carries danger. For every accurate vision, there are countless false ones. The archive reveals the cost: people imprisoned, lives destroyed, heresies declared. Some prophets were revered in their villages, but condemned in Rome. Their writings remain here, testimony to voices that dared to see beyond their time and paid for it. The whispers of prophecy remind us that the archive is not only a record of the past, it is also a record of how the future was once imagined. To read them is to feel the strange mixture of hope and dread that accompanies every attempt to see what lies ahead. And even now, with centuries of hindsight, the words unsettle, because prophecy, once written, never fully dies. It waits, whispering still, preserved in silence, daring us to wonder if some part of it has yet to come true. It is said that the Vatican's archive holds 85 kilometers of shelves. But those who walk its halls know the number is less important than the feeling it creates. Vastness, labyrinth, infinity. And within this labyrinth are rumours of rooms not on any map, chambers sealed behind walls, staircases that lead to nowhere visible. Whether myth or truth, the idea of hidden rooms clings to the archive like dust in sunlight. Scholars speak of doors they have glimpsed but never opened, corridors that appear on old plans but are absent in reality, boxes that reference files stored in locations no one can find. The Vatican never confirms nor denies. It simply maintains its silence, letting imagination fill the gaps. And so, hidden rooms become part of the mythology of the archive. Some say these rooms contain the most sensitive documents, correspondences with rulers that reveal betrayal, treaties never acknowledged, evidence of failures buried to protect authority. Others believe they hold relics, sacred objects deemed too dangerous or too controversial to display. A fragment of the true cross, perhaps, or ancient manuscripts that contradict accepted scripture. The theories multiply in the absence of proof. What is certain is that secrecy is deliberate. The Vatican has always understood the power of mystery. To confirm would be to end speculation. To deny would be to invite more. And so it allows the whispers to grow. The hidden rooms may exist, or they may not, but their absence on official maps makes them more real than stone. Some archivists admit, cautiously, that there are spaces closed to almost everyone. Vaults, where the most fragile documents are stored under special conditions. Chambers, where items taken from Napoleon's seizure of the archives are still being sorted. These rooms are not sinister, but they are hidden, and for the curious, that is enough. Mystery thrives on partial truth. The hidden rooms also carry symbolic weight. They remind us that every archive, no matter how vast, has places you cannot go. Knowledge is never complete. There are always walls, always doors, always thresholds, beyond which memory is withheld. The Vatican, with its centuries of guardianship, embodies this truth. Its hidden rooms are both physical and metaphorical. To walk the archive is to feel them, even if you never see them. You pass a wall and wonder if there is more behind it. You hear a door close and wonder who was allowed through. The silence feeds the imagination. And perhaps that is the point. The hidden rooms, real or not, remind us that the archive is not meant to yield everything. Some secrets are kept, if only to remind us that mystery itself is power. At last, you realize that the archive has no ending. You can measure its shelves, trace its catalogues, walk its corridors, but the feeling remains the same: endlessness. 85 kilometers is only a number. In reality, the archive stretches through time, not space. It holds centuries, stacked on centuries, layer upon layer of memory that no one person can ever absorb. To enter it is to accept that you will never finish. The endless archive is not only Vatican paper, it is the human story reflected through the lens of faith and power. It contains love letters disguised as petitions, desperate pleas for help, treaties signed in triumph, confessions whispered in fear. It contains knowledge preserved and knowledge withheld. It contains what was meant to be remembered and what was meant to be forgotten but survived anyway. To read in the archive is to feel small. No matter how many boxes you open, how many slips you fill, you touch only the surface. Behind every document are 100 more. Behind every truth uncovered is a silence still unbroken. The archive is infinite because history is infinite. And yet, this endlessness is not despair, it is wonder. To know that memory this vast exists is to know that humanity has left a record of itself, fragile but enduring. It is to know that the stories of kings and peasants, saints and sinners, victories and betrayals all converge here, waiting in quiet boxes. The archive is endless, not because it cannot be finished, but because it never stops speaking. The endless archive also teaches humility. No scholar, no pope, no archivist can claim to hold it all. Each sees a fragment, a sliver of light through a half-open door. Together, across generations, those fragments form a larger picture, but never the whole. The archive is always more than we can know. And perhaps that is its final gift. To leave the Vatican's forbidden archive is to carry this sense of endlessness with you. You step back into the Roman sun, the city loud after so much silence. But in your mind, the shelves keep stretching, the boxes keep waiting, the last door still closed. You realize that the archive is not only in stone vaults beneath a palace, it is in us. We are the archive, carriers of memory, guardians of silence, keepers of both truth and mystery. The Vatican's forbidden archives may remain locked to most, but their lesson is open. History is endless, mystery is necessary, and silence is as much a part of truth as revelation. And so you walk away, not with answers, but with questions. Not with certainty, but with awe. The endless archive follows you, whispering still, reminding you that the story of humanity, like the shelves themselves, has no final box. Not everyone who enters the Vatican's archive is a scholar in search of a dissertation or a historian chasing footnotes. Some come as pilgrims. They are drawn not by academic need, but by something deeper, an urge to touch history, to breathe the dust of centuries, to stand in the presence of memory itself. For them, the archive is not merely a library, it is a shrine. Pilgrims of paper walk with reverence. Their steps are quiet, their hands almost trembling as they receive the wooden cart carrying a box. They open it not with the impatience of research, but with the devotion of ritual. To them, every fold of parchment is a relic, every faded line of ink a prayer. Some whisper words as they read, others simply sit in silence, eyes fixed on the fragile letters before them. The archive does not encourage sentiment, yet it cannot prevent it. When you hold a document signed by a pope centuries ago, or a letter written by a saint, you cannot help but feel the weight of presence. These are not abstract words. They are physical traces of human lives. A feather quill dipped in ink once moved across this page. A hand once folded it, sealed it, sent it across oceans or kingdoms. That hand is dust now, but the gesture endures. Pilgrims sense this, and it moves them to awe. Some bring with them stories of ancestors, a rumour that their family once corresponded with Rome, a tale of a priest who wrote from a distant land. They come hoping to find a trace, a name in a ledger, a signature in a letter. Often they leave disappointed. The archive is too vast, too impersonal to yield family stories easily. But even when they find nothing, the act of searching feels sacred. To sit among the shelves is to join a long procession of seekers who have walked these corridors before. Others come for spiritual reasons. They see in the archive a testimony of faith preserved through storms of history. They come to touch the evidence that belief endured wars, schisms, heresies, and still remained. They read not only with their minds, but with their hearts, finding inspiration in the resilience of ink that refused to fade. For them, the archive is proof that truth, however fragile, can survive centuries of attack. Yet not all pilgrims are devout. Some come out of fascination with power, eager to glimpse the machinery of an institution that shaped the world. They treat the archive as others treat a battlefield or a palace sacred, not because of holiness, but because of its impact. They seek to stand in the presence of decisions that altered borders, decrees that silenced voices, letters that ended wars. For them, the archive is history in its rawest form, and standing before it is a kind of pilgrimage of knowledge. The Vatican tolerates these pilgrims, though it does not advertise for them. Access is still restricted, rules still apply, but the presence of awe cannot be denied. Even the most hardened archivist has seen it, the way some readers close their eyes after touching parchment, as though saying a prayer, the way some linger long after their work is done, reluctant to leave. The archive becomes not just a place of research, but a place of transformation. The pilgrims of paper remind us that archives are not neutral. They are charged with meaning, infused with the weight of the human spirit. To walk among the shelves is to walk among echoes, to feel yourself part of a continuum that stretches back to the earliest scribes and forward into a future not yet written. The documents may be old, but the awe they inspire is always new, and in that awe lies the archive's deepest power, not only to preserve knowledge, but to awaken reverence. Every archive reflects the institution that built it. The Vatican's archive reflects power, spiritual, political, and cultural. To walk its shelves is to walk through the history of decisions made not only in prayer, but in strategy, in ambition, in control. The documents preserved here do not merely record belief. They record authority exercised over millions of lives, and in their silence, they still radiate the shadow of that power. Consider the papal bulls. Each one a declaration, written in firm Latin, sealed with lead, sent forth to reshape the world. Some called for crusades, sending armies to war under the sign of the cross. Others excommunicated kings, casting crowns into uncertainty. Still others divided continents, drawing lines across oceans as though the earth itself were a chessboard. These documents are not dusty relics. They are weapons forged in ink. They are echoes of voices that once commanded empires. The shadow of power also lies in the letters of diplomacy. The archive holds correspondence between popes and rulers, each line a negotiation, a plea, a threat, a king begging for annulment, a queen demanding recognition, a prince offering loyalty in exchange for favour. The Vatican was more than a church. It was an arbiter, a broker of legitimacy. And the letters, preserved in their boxes, reveal how power was traded, withheld, and granted. But power is not always triumphant. Some documents show its fragility. A pope writing in desperation as armies approach Rome, an order sent to defend a city that fell before the letter arrived, a decree excommunicating rebels who ignored it entirely. These records reveal the limits of authority, the moments when power cracked, when the shadow proved thin. Yet even these failures were preserved, as if to remind future generations that power is never absolute. The shadow also stretches into darker realms. Inquisition files record trials that silenced dissent. Testimonies extracted under pressure, names of heretics written with finality. These documents are not proud proclamations, but evidence of fear disguised as certainty. They show the Church not as a beacon of light, but as an institution desperate to maintain control, even at terrible cost. The archive keeps these shadows intact, refusing to let them fade. And yet, to see only darkness would be to miss the complexity. Alongside these documents of control are records of mercy letters, granting pardon, decrees forgiving debts, petitions answered with generosity. Power was exercised not only through command, but also through compassion. The shadow is not total, it is nuanced, layered, shifting. Still, the archive makes one truth clear: power is always written. Without paper, authority dissipates into rumour. With it, power becomes permanent. The Vatican understood this, and so it preserved not only prayers, but orders, not only sermons, but strategies. The archive is therefore a monument not just to faith, but to governance, to the shadow of power cast across centuries. To read these documents today is to feel that shadow still. You sense the lives altered, the wars fought, the destinies decided by lines of ink, and you realize that the Vatican's archive is not only a record of belief, it is a record of rule. The shadow of power lingers in every box, reminding us that history is never only about ideas. It is about authority, exercised in silence, preserved forever in paper. If there is one theme that unites every shelf, every box, every fragment of parchment in the Vatican's archive, it is time. The archive is not merely a collection of documents. It is a machine of memory, a keeper of time itself. It gathers moments from centuries, holds them still, and allows us to look back as though the past were not gone but only waiting. Time moves strangely here. You can open one box and find yourself in the 10th century, then reach for another and land in the 20th. Kings and popes, martyrs and merchants, soldiers and scholars all speak across centuries as if their voices were neighbours. The archive collapses distance, erases centuries, makes the farthest past feel near, and yet time also resists. Documents yellow, ink fades, edges crumble. The archive fights this decay with every tool it has: controlled light, careful humidity, delicate repair. It is a constant battle, a reminder that memory is fragile. Without care, time wins. With care, the past endures. The archivists know this, and their work is nothing less than defiance against time's relentless pull. But the keeper of time is more than preservation. It is also revelation. The archive reveals not only what happened but when, reminding us that every story is rooted in a moment, a treaty signed on a winter's day, a letter written in haste as an army approached, a papal bull proclaimed under the shadow of plague. These dates are not incidental. They anchor the stories, remind us that history is not abstract. It is time, lived and recorded. The Vatican's archive also teaches that time is not linear. Prophecies leap forward, imagining futures that may or may not come. Revisions of memory look backward, reshaping past events to fit present needs. Embargoed documents wait in silence, their time not yet arrived. In the archive, time is layered, folded, twisted. The past, present, and future mingle in boxes and shelves, each waiting for its moment to be read. And there is another truth: the archive itself is now part of time. What began centuries ago as a papal memory has become a monument of history in its own right. Scholars in future centuries will study not only the documents it preserves, but the choices it made, the silences it maintained, the access it granted or denied. The archive is not outside history. It is inside it, a keeper of time that will itself be judged by time. To walk its corridors is to feel this weight. Every box is a clock, ticking silently, holding a moment still until it is opened. Every sealed file is a future waiting to arrive. Every fragile parchment is a past refusing to disappear. The Vatican's archive is the keeper of time because it proves that time does not erase everything. Some things endure, waiting for us to find them, waiting to remind us that memory, though fragile, can outlast centuries. And so the archive stands, silent but alive, guarding time itself. It whispers that we are temporary, but memory can be lasting. That we are dust, but words can endure. That time flows, but some moments can be captured, held, preserved. The keeper of time waits in its quiet halls, reminding us that to remember is to resist forgetting, and that resistance is the most human act of all. The Vatican's archive is not only a collection of documents, but also a collection of languages. Latin fills the shelves, precise and formal, the language of decrees and bulls. Italian flows through the margins, the everyday tongue of correspondence. French, Spanish, German, and Greek appear in letters from rulers, missionaries, scholars. Even Arabic and Chinese find their way into these boxes, the voices of distant lands reaching Rome. But more important than the diversity of tongues is the way language itself is used as a tool of secrecy, of revelation, of power. Many of the documents are written not in plain words, but in code. Simple ciphers, letters replaced with numbers or symbols, make their appearance in diplomatic correspondence. Some codes are so rudimentary that a patient reader could crack them. Others are complex, designed to hide meaning from all but the intended eyes. A letter might appear meaningless until a key is applied, a substitution chart that transforms gibberish into command. The archive holds both the coded messages and the keys, reminders that secrecy was as much part of diplomacy as truth. Language also hides informality. Papal decrees are written in Latin so precise, so ornate, that even native readers must pause to untangle meaning. This was deliberate. Authority expressed in dense syntax is authority less likely to be challenged. The words carry weight not because of clarity, but because of their aura of permanence. To read them centuries later is to feel how language itself was a weapon, wielded with elegance and precision. But secrecy also lived in omission. Letters that dance around subjects, never naming names, never stating intentions outright. Margins filled with shorthand notes, intelligible only to the writer. The archive preserves these evasions as carefully as it preserves proclamations. What is not said is often as revealing as what island. Scholars reading such letters find themselves not only historians but detectives, piecing together meaning from hints and silences. There are also the languages of the marginalized petitions, written in broken Latin, by peasants or exiles, their words stumbling but desperate. These documents reveal voices not trained in the elegance of power, but driven by need. A request for justice, a plea for mercy, written in halting phrases that betray the struggle of the writer. The archive preserves these too, and they remind us that language can be both a bridge and a barrier. Those who spoke it fluently wielded power. Those who struggled with it begged at its gates. The Vatican itself was fluent in the art of secrecy. Letters from the Curia are filled with euphemisms, polite phrases masking sharp commands. Reports from informants cloak accusation in caution, as though soft words could dull the blade they carried. Even the way documents were labelled carried codes, abbreviations that revealed their purpose only to insiders. The language of secrets extended beyond the page. It became a culture. And yet, language also preserved beauty. Some manuscripts are written with such care, such artistry, that the words themselves feel like prayer. Illuminated initials, colours that glow centuries later, lines of script so delicate they seem to float. These documents remind us that even secrets can be wrapped in beauty. The language of the archive is not only concealment, it is also expression, art, devotion. To read in the archive is to listen across tongues and centuries. It is to hear whispers in Latin, cries in broken vernacular, commands in code. It is to sense the hidden layers beneath every word. And it is to realize that secrecy was not only in the locked doors. It was in the language itself, shaped to hide and to reveal, to guard power and to preserve faith. The language of secrets still speaks, if we are patient enough to listen. Every shelf in the archive carries dust, not the careless dust of neglect, but the inevitable dust of time. It settles on parchment, creeps into bindings, clings to boxes. Archivists brush it away carefully, but it returns, as steady as silence. Dust is more than nuisance here. It is memory in physical form, the residue of centuries compressed into powder. To walk the archive is to breathe it in, to feel history enter your lungs with every breath. The weight of dust is not symbolic alone, it is literal. Pages crumble under its touch. Ink fades where dust has absorbed moisture. Fragments break away with handling, carried like ash into the air. The Vatican fights this decay with vigilance, controlled humidity, careful cleaning, delicate repair, but dust always returns. It is time made visible, time refusing to be denied. Some scholars speak of the smell of the archive, the faint mustiness of parchment, the sharp tang of old ink, the dryness of dust. It is not unpleasant. For many, it is sacred, a sensory reminder that the words they hold are old, enduring, fragile. The weight of dust reminds them that memory is material, that history has a texture, a scent, a presence that cannot be digitized. But dust also hides. Layers of it can obscure writing, making text illegible until cleaned. Some documents were nearly lost because of this, their words buried under centuries of neglect. When archivists uncover them, brushing away powder, the effect is like resurrection, voices silenced. For generations suddenly speak again. Dust both threatens and protects. It destroys ink, but it also discourages careless handling. In its weight lies paradox. There are moments when dust feels almost alive. You open a box, sealed for centuries, and a faint cloud rises, as though the past exhaled at your touch. You sneeze, you cough, you blink, and then you read. The dust has entered you, mingling your body with the history you hold. It is unsettling and intimate, a reminder that the archive is not separate from us. We breathe it in, and in doing so, we carry fragments of centuries within ourselves. The Vatican knows this power. It trains its archivists not only in languages, but in preservation, in the art of dust. They wear gloves, use brushes, handle pages like relics. They fight a battle that cannot be won, but must always be fought. For every fragment saved is a victory against time, every word legible a triumph over silence. The dust will always return, but so will the guardians who brush it away. To feel the weight of dust is to feel humility. It reminds us that no matter how mighty an institution, no matter how powerful a decree, all things decay. Ink fades, parchment crumbles, bindings collapse. Only vigilance can preserve them, and even that is temporary. Dust is the final equalizer, settling on pope and peasant alike. The archive preserves power, but dust whispers that power too shall pass. And yet, within that whisper lies comfort. For if dust is inevitable, so too is memory. The very fact that we fight to preserve it, that archivists labour over fragile fragments, proves that humanity refuses to let go. The weight of dust is heavy, but it is also sacred. It reminds us that memory is fragile, but the will to preserve it is strong. And that will is what keeps the archive alive, even as centuries crumble into powder. The Vatican's archive is not only past, it is present. Every year, new documents are added: letters from modern popes, treaties with nations, records of decisions made in our own time. What feels like a monument to history is also a living organism, still growing, still absorbing, still shaping the memory of tomorrow. To walk its halls is to realize that you are not only visiting what was, you are standing in what will be. Boxes arrive not only from ancient vaults, but from papal offices. Files marked with recent dates, typed instead of handwritten, printed emails instead of folded letters. They seem ordinary, almost mundane, yet these too will one day be history. A memo about a diplomatic visit may appear trivial now. In a century, it may be studied as evidence of a turning point. The archive teaches patience. What seems unimportant today may be vital tomorrow. The living archive also reminds us that secrecy is not only the past's concern. Documents created today are subject to the same rules of access, the same embargoes, the same silence. Scholars 100 years from now will puzzle over our age, piecing it together from boxes sealed until long after we are gone. The Vatican's methods do not change. The rhythm of preservation endures. There is a strange intimacy in this. The same shelves that hold parchment from the Middle Ages will one day hold digital printouts from the 21st century. The continuity is astonishing. Handwritten bulls and typed letters sit side by side, centuries apart, yet equally preserved. The archive is not a museum of relics. It is a living body, always accepting, always transforming, always waiting. For those who work within it, this continuity is humbling. Archivists know they are not only preserving the past, but curating the present. Every document they file is a message to the future. Every choice they make shapes how tomorrow will see today. In this way, the living archive is not passive. It is active, participating in history, even as it records it. And for those who visit, the living archive is a revelation. You come expecting only silence, only dust. Instead, you discover vibrancy. You see boxes marked with years you lived through, names you recognize, events you remember. Suddenly, you are part of the archive. Your own time is already history, waiting on a shelf. The Vatican's forbidden archives endure because they are alive. They breathe with new additions, pulse with new secrets, grow with every generation. They remind us that history is not over. It is happening now, being folded into boxes, sealed with tags, placed on shelves that stretch farther each year. And one day, others will open those boxes, breathe the dust of our time, and wonder about us as we wonder about those who came before. The living archive whispers the final truth, that memory is endless, that the story never stops, that we too will be judged by what we leave behind, and in that realization lies the greatest awe of all. The archive is not only theirs, it is ours. It lives, it grows, and it waits for the next box, the next century, the next hand to open it and listen to its silence. Every person who enters the Vatican's archive, whether scholar, cleric, or pilgrim, carries a question with them. Some know their question clearly. They seek a date, a signature, a single line that proves a claim. Others carry questions they cannot name until they sit before a box and feel its weight. These questions are not always about history. They are often about themselves. To step into the archive is to confront silence. In that silence, questions grow louder. Why did an empire fall? Why was a book banned? Why did the church choose silence at one moment and speech at another? The documents may not always give answers, but they give something more: context. They show the choices made, the fears hidden, the reasons half revealed. For some, this is enough. For others, it deepens the mystery. Pilgrims often leave the archive with more questions than they brought. They come searching for clarity and depart with complexity. A letter that seems to answer one doubt opens three more. A decree that resolves one dispute reveals hidden struggles beneath. The archive does not satisfy curiosity, it transforms it. Questions grow like vines, climbing the shelves, stretching across centuries. Yet this is the nature of pilgrimage. The destination is not the point. The journey island. To sit with a document centuries old, to trace its letters with your eyes, is to join a line of seekers who have asked before you. You may not find your answer, but you find yourself among the company of questions. The archive becomes not a vault of certainty, but a chapel of inquiry. Some questions are deeply personal. A pilgrim might sit with a record of an ancestor, condemned as heretic, wondering if faith or survival guided their choices. Another might read a papal decree granting mercy to a town, and wonder if their own village once trembled under such authority. In these questions lies identity, the search for connection between the self and the vast machinery of history. Others carry theological questions. They seek to know why one doctrine was preserved while another was cast aside. They hope to find the hidden roots of faith, to glimpse the human decisions behind divine proclamations. These questions are rarely resolved, but the attempt to answer them changes the seeker, humbling them before the complexity of belief shaped across centuries. The pilgrim's question is never small. It is always large enough to echo through the shelves, to resonate with the silence. And the archive, though it does not speak, answers in its own way. It answers with weight, with fragility, with the sight of paper that has survived storms of time. It says, "This is what remains." From this, you must build your answer, and so the pilgrim departs with pockets empty but heart full. They leave not with clarity but with awe, not with resolution but with reverence. Their question remains, but it has been changed. It is no longer a demand for certainty. It is a companion, a shadow walking with them as they step back into the noise of the world. The Vatican's archive does not silence questions, it sanctifies them. And in this lies its true gift to the pilgrim who dares to enter. Every lock has a key, and every key has a silence. The Vatican's archive is guarded not by walls alone, but by keys that turn quietly, granting access to some and withholding it from others. These keys are literal metal teeth, shaped to fit ancient locks, and metaphorical, the permissions and approvals that determine who may read and who must wait. Together, they form a system of control as old as the archive itself. The silence of the keys is profound. A scholar may spend years preparing, submitting requests, proving worthiness, only to be granted access to a fraction of what they hope to see. The archivist turns the key, unlocks the box, and presents what is allowed. The rest remains sealed, the silence of the keys holding it beyond reach. To the scholar, it is a reminder that knowledge is not a right but a privilege, carefully rationed. There is power in this silence. The Church knows that what it reveals shapes history, and what it withholds shapes it too. A letter locked away may protect reputations, preserve unity, avoid scandal, but it also creates gaps, silences that generations of historians must navigate. The keys decide which voices survive and which remain unheard. The archivists do not wield this power lightly, but they wield it nonetheless. The keys themselves are symbols. Heavy, iron, ornate, they rest on belts and desks, reminders of the guardianship of memory. Their turning is never casual. Each twist represents trust, responsibility, access. And each denial represents protection, caution, secrecy. The silence of the keys is not only about what is kept closed, it is about the weight of deciding when to open. Some argue that too much remains locked. They say history belongs to all, that silence protects not faith but power. Others argue that the silence is necessary, that without it, the archive would become spectacle, its sacred memory reduced to curiosity. Between these voices, the keys remain still, turning slowly, carefully, always with silence. And yet, the silence is not absolute. Every decade, new boxes are opened, new files made available. The keys turn gradually, and the archive breathes out secrets long withheld. Scholars rush to read them, to fill gaps, to challenge old narratives. But even as new truths emerge, the silence deepens elsewhere, reminding us that not everything will ever be revealed. The silence of the keys teaches patience. It tells us that knowledge comes in fragments, that truth arrives slowly, that mystery is not always meant to be solved at once. The archivists turn their keys not to satisfy curiosity, but to preserve balance between revelation and restraint, and so the seeker waits. They sit in the reading room, the unopened boxes just beyond reach, the silence of the keys pressing on them. They know that what is hidden may change everything or nothing at all. They know that the silence itself is as much a message as the words on the page. In that silence, they learn humility. In that silence, they confront the limits of knowledge. The archive does not open all its doors. The keys do not turn for everyone. And perhaps that is the final truth of the silence of the keys, that mystery endures not because it cannot be revealed, but because sometimes it must not. There comes a moment when every seeker leaves the archive. The box is closed, the slip returned, the reading room emptied. The pilgrim walks back through the corridors, past the guards, past the heavy doors, into the Roman air. The transition is jarring. The world outside is loud, bright, fast. The silence of the archive lingers like a shadow, following each step. The last pilgrimage is not about discovery, it is about departure. To leave the archive is to accept that you have touched only a fraction of what lies within. It is to accept that your questions remain, that your answers are partial, that history is larger than you can hold. The last pilgrimage is a lesson in humility. For some, the departure is painful. They linger in courtyards, reluctant to return to ordinary life. They feel as though they are leaving behind not just paper, but presence. The documents they touched seemed alive. The voices they read seemed near. To walk away feels like betrayal, as though closing the box silenced them again. The last pilgrimage weighs heavily on such souls. For others, departure is release. They step back into the sunlight with gratitude, carrying the memory of silence as a treasure. They feel lighter, as though they have shared in something sacred. They do not regret leaving, because they know the archive is not truly left behind. It remains with them, in memory, in imagination, in the questions it planted. The last pilgrimage is not the end of the archive, it is the beginning of its echo. Those who leave carry stories into the world. They publish, they teach, they speak. They pass on fragments of what they saw, shaping how others imagine the forbidden halls. The archive itself may be silent, but its pilgrims are not. They become its voice, spreading whispers of its secrets far beyond its locked doors. Yet the last pilgrimage also reveals a deeper truth. The archive does not exist only in stone chambers beneath the Vatican. It exists in us. Every memory we preserve, every question we carry, every silence we respect, we become the archive. To leave its halls is to realize that we are also its guardians, its pilgrims, its keepers of time. The last pilgrimage teaches that endings are illusions. The archive continues, endless, eternal, waiting for the next seeker. Its doors will close behind you, but they will open for another. Its silence will remain, but it will whisper differently to each who listens. You may leave, but the archive does not. It waits, patient, vast, alive. And so the last pilgrimage is never final. It is only a pause, a step away before the next return. Even if you never walk its corridors again, you will carry it within you. Its silence will shape your questions. Its memory will guide your thoughts. Its presence will remind you that truth is never fully found, only glimpsed. The last pilgrimage ends with the same realization with which it began. The Vatican's forbidden archive is not about answers. It is about awe. And awe, once touched, never leaves. For all the boxes filled with paper, for all the documents written, copied, sealed, and preserved, the Vatican's archive also holds something more elusive: the shadows of what was never written at all. History is not only the record of what was expressed, but also the echo of what was suppressed, forgotten, or deliberately left unspoken. These shadows are everywhere in the archive, not in ink, but in absence. To sit before a file is to wonder what words were never committed to parchment. A trial transcript might contain every question, every answer, every verdict, and yet the silences are louder. What did the accused truly think but never dared to say? What prayers did they whisper in the darkness of their cell? Prayers that no scribe recorded. The archive captures the surface but leaves shadows beneath. And in those shadows lies another kind of history. Consider the papal bulls. They declare with authority, with certainty, with the weight of divine command, but what drafts were torn and discarded before the final decree? What doubts were discussed in quiet chambers, never written down, never preserved? The archive gives us the words of certainty, but the shadows remind us that certainty is never so simple. There are also the voices silenced before they could ever speak. Women who lived in the margins of faith, mystics dismissed, thinkers condemned before they could write. Their words exist only in fragments, in hostile reports, in accusations. The shadows of the unwritten cling to these fragments, hinting at lives and ideas that could have reshaped history had they been allowed to endure. The Vatican's archive preserves what it values, but its silences reveal what it feared. Entire movements appear only through the words of their enemies, entire ideas only through their condemnation. These shadows are harder to read than the documents themselves, but they are no less real. They haunt the boxes, reminding us that every preserved memory is also a chosen memory, and that choice casts long shadows. The unwritten also appears in the gaps of time. Whole decades where records are sparse, not because nothing happened, but because nothing was kept. Fires destroyed some, wars scattered others, but many simply were never recorded. The life of a peasant, the thoughts of a child, the grief of a widow, these were rarely written, and so the archive remains silent. Yet their absence is its own testimony. The shadows of the unwritten remind us that history is never complete. It is a tapestry with holes, a song with missing verses, a memory with fading edges. To walk among the shelves is to feel these shadows pressing close. They are not empty, they are heavy with possibility. They whisper of stories lost, ideas suppressed, lives forgotten. They remind us that history is not truth but fragment, that what we know is shaped as much by silence as by speech. And so, the Vatican's forbidden archive teaches its greatest paradox, that even in a place dedicated to memory, forgetting reigns. The shadows of the unwritten are as vast as the documents themselves, stretching beyond the shelves into the infinite spaces of what might have been. To acknowledge them is not despair, but humility. It is to know that our grasp of history will always be partial, and that the greatest truths may be those we will never read.